Welcome back to another episode of the Irish Breakdown podcast. Happy Friday, everybody. Hope everybody has had a great week, ready for a long weekend. But before we get there, you guys know what it is. It's Friday here at Irish Breakdown as well, which means it is free-for-all mailbag day, which means you guys in the chat, our avid listeners, day in and day out, get to dictate what Brian and I get to talk about today. I love these days. I know we sit down looking forward to these days. One, spend a lot of time planning throughout the week of content to put out. And two, every single week you guys bring really good topics of conversation for Brian and I to sit and break down. So if this happens to be your first time tuning in for a Friday Free-For-All mailbag, what you need to do to get your question answered is you put a little MB next to your question or comment or a mailbox emoji. That lets Brian and I know to set that question aside so we can touch on it. We already have 50 questions starred, which is awesome. There's going to be a lot of conversation today. We're going to get to as many of those as we possibly can before either time runs out or we pass out before we do so. So one or the other is going to happen first. But to make sure that you get your question answered.
I'm not passing out, man. I'm ready to go. I got energy. I got 13 dudes here beside me. I'm ready to roll.
There we go. Okay, so Brian's ready to go. He's caffeinated up. I'm ready to go here. Got my energy drink here too, so we're ready to rock and roll.
We're both very unhealthy, is what we're trying to get across to you guys. We both have dietary changes that we need to make.
Yeah, we run on caffeine and Notre Dame football and good old blue and gold spirit, I suppose, over here. But if you do want your question answered, be sure before time runs out today. We always appreciate a super chat; those get bumped up to the top. But before we get started today, Brian, I know you had a little announcement.
Yeah, I just want to remind people, just so people understand, obviously there's certain things that, we love everybody that's on the show with us live, and we really appreciate that, and we enjoy the live shows. And I think, to me, that's like the most fun way to partake in our shows. This is more for if you're listening via podcast, or if you're listening to this live YouTube show after the fact, just a couple things to consider. Number one of the complaints that we get is there's just a lot of ads, and I get it. We don't control those on YouTube. When we control what you see when it's live, but we don't have control. YouTube just puts ads wherever they want to do ads. No, we don't have the bandwidth to go in there and like insert ads and all that kind of stuff, and especially for what we make from YouTube. So just keep that in mind, that if you're watching on a show that's not live, there's nothing we can do about the ads. What we try to do is, number one, we'll try to cut the segments up into smaller sections and put them up on video. But the other thing is, if you're not watching live, unless you just like looking at our beautiful faces, we put everything up on our podcast platform. So like when we do this show today, tomorrow morning at 6 a.m., the first segment of the mailbag will go up. And depending on how long the mailbag is, we'll cut it into like usually about an hour segment. Like yesterday's show, for example, was 4 different segments. We had the intro at the beginning where we kind of talked about Notre Dame not being respected. Then we cut that into its own, it was like 20-something minute segment. Then we had the Notre Dame offensive players that are underrated. We cut that into a different segment. Then we did the same thing with the defense. Then we did the mailbag. So 4 different segments. So if you're not listening live, if you're catching this show later, if you're listening via podcast, obviously those are different ways that you can consume our content where the ads are more manageable. And so when you look at the podcast platform, for example, there'll be a few ads at the very beginning before the show starts. And then once the show starts, there's only usually like 1 to 2 spots within that entire time where we will actually insert ads, and we have more control over that and try to make it more listener or user friendly, so to speak. So it's not just we're in the middle of a sentence and all of a sudden, boom, ad pops up, So just to give you guys an idea, there are different ways you can consume this. Obviously, the live shows are going to be longer, but then we break those down into other segments, because the other complaint people have is your shows are too long. Well, number one, if the show's too long, don't watch the whole show. You have the right to listen to watch whatever segments or portions of the show you want. You can fast forward things that don't interest you. But again, if you like them in less, so because we want to try to appease everyone. And so if we do one short show, then the people that like longer shows, you have a lot of truck drivers. Tommy Guns is a truck driver. Based on some comments yesterday, I believe that Michael Cannon is an example of another person's truck driver. My dad grew up driving a UPS truck, always have AM radio on all day listening to it. And so for people like that, they love the longer live shows. And so we want to be able to meet their need. But for people who don't have 3 hours to sit down and consume all the content, that's why we try to break it up into smaller segments for you in different formats. So whether it's putting up videos that are based on one part of the show, and especially on the podcast platform, which is the best way revenue-wise that you can consume our content. So I have been getting a lot of those questions and people asking about this and that. And I just want to make sure that we're very clear at the beginning of the show that we're trying to, and we've been doing this for a couple years now. We're trying to make sure that people who enjoy our content in very different formats, some like the long form, some don't, we are reaching all of it. But if it's going to be live, we're going to do live shows. But if you can't catch live or you don't have the time to listen to all of it, there are different things that we do to make sure that you can still consume our content, enjoy our content in whatever form or platform you look. So like I said, unless you just love staring at our pretty faces, well, Trevor's pretty face, you can do the podcast app, and they're broken down into different formats, and there's obviously a little less intrusive ads in there. And that's one of the reasons we left Blue Wires, because they were just putting ads just all over the place. Like they wanted ads within the first couple minutes and things like that. And one of the things we love about being Believe is they definitely, yes, we have to have ads because that's how we make our money, but they care a lot more about making the shows more friendly to consumers and not just popping in money makers any chance we get. So I just wanted to make sure that we discuss that before we kicked off today's show, so that way it's out there and people can see, can understand that we're doing this in a lot of different ways to try to meet the different needs that people have. So hopefully that was able to address a few things before we get started today.
Well, good deal. Well, I'm ready to hop into this mailbag today, Brian. What say you?
Always ready. Always ready. Coach Bent kicking things off today. Love it.
If Coach Mike Denbrock was building his ideal offense and can only use current college players but none from Notre Dame, who would he choose at each position?
That is a great question. Man, I think running back, I'd have to think about that. Who's a guy that's like Jeremiah Love? You know what I mean? Like, I think Mike Denbrock does like the idea of running backs that are versatile, that can do different things. I think he'd probably like Nicholas Singleton a decent amount, because Nicholas Singleton is a guy that can catch the ball out of the backfield and do some different things. I think he might like the Mekhi Hughes kid from Oregon, who was at Tulane last year. So there's a couple backs like that. I think he would like to have a Desmond Reed as the number 2 back in a class. Again, because you can't have the 2 backs that Notre Dame has. Desmond Reed's more of a guy that you can just do a lot of different gadgety type of things with as a running back. And we've seen Notre Dame go after players like that under Mike Denbrock, where they like those guys can kind of do a little bit of everything. That's part of the reason they went after Nolan James last year, is because Nolan James is a kid that, I mean, if the need arose, you could put him in the slot and do things with him in the slot, not just as a good running back. And I'm not saying he's a slot receiver. I love Nolan James as a running back. But I'm saying is, if a need arose, he's one of those kids you could just say, hey, man, we need you to go play slot. And I think there's value to having guys like that. Every player doesn't have to be like that, but it's good to have guys like that on your roster. So I think he'd probably go there. At wide receiver, Trev, I think we're 11 personnel type of situation. I think the two, the X and the Z are pretty easy to guess. And, I think he'd probably want Jeremiah Smith in the boundary, not just because he's a freak, but, again, can you not see Jeremiah Smith doing in Mike Denbrock's offense what he did with Brian Thomas a couple years ago at LSU? Could you not see Malik Neighbors and Ryan Williams being like really great fits for what he's trying to do there? And if he couldn't have the current group of slots, I think he'd like to have somebody like an Eric Singleton in the slot on the inside of those 2 guys. That's probably where I think he'd go there. And then, tight end. Honestly, I have to say I'm not as up to speed on who the best tight ends are coming back. I think the kid from Purdue would fit Max Clare would probably fit Mike Denbrock's system pretty well. Eli Stowers from Vanderbilt would fit the system pretty well, but I can't tell you that those would be the 2 he'd go with, because that's a position that I'm still doing my research on to see who the top guys in the country are going to be this year. So, but I do think that the Max Clare kid I am familiar with, and I think he would fit sort of kind of the mold that Denbrock likes at tight end, but he's gone with different types of tight ends at different times. and could thrive with whoever. It's just about getting the best available talent. So that's probably where I would go with. Quarterback's the interesting one, Trev. But before we get to quarterback, what are your thoughts on the rest of those skill players?
Yeah, I have no disagreements. I was going to mention Nicholas Singleton. If he wanted more of the heavier 1-2 punch, I mean, the easiest answer would be, hey, just really just take the Penn State running room and insert it in South Bend. No disagreements on receivers. I like the Isaiah Horton kid that Miami picked up from Alabama as well. Could see him in that sort of role as well in the boundaries. Another big-bodied kid.
If you couldn't get Jeremiah Smith.
So, and then tight end, I was going to say either Max Clare or the kid from Vandy. So no disagreements. No disagreements on my end.
Quarterback's more of an interesting one because I don't know if any of the guys that we would perceive as top returners are necessarily guys that would be perfect fits for what Mike Denbrock wants. I'd probably lean towards Cade Klubnik from the standpoint of just the known commodity aspects and the fact that Cade is a pocket passer that's athletic, that can run around. He's not a dual threat quarterback. He's not a guy that you're going to necessarily go run the same offense you ran with Deshaun Watson and Taj Boyd at Clemson, but he's a guy that you can do some read zone stuff with. You can do some different things where he can scramble and he can, move the chains as a runner. He had 400 some plus yards last year as a runner, 7 touchdowns. I mean, his long touchdown run against Pitt won them the game. So he brings some of that not dual threat, but mobility to the table where he can hurt you with his legs. But Cade Klubnik's at his best when he's sitting in the pocket throwing the football. And I'd probably go with him. I don't know that if he could have any quarterback in college football that he'd go with an Arch Manning or a DJ Lagway or a player like that who's unproven. I think he would like the veteran quarterback that's more of a proven commodity if he couldn't have the guys that he had. But I'll say this. I feel confident in saying this, that if you were going to give him a chance, and I'm being serious here, from what I know of Mike Denbrock's feelings about the quarterback room, if you gave him an opportunity to say, hey, we'll trade you your room for someone else's room, I don't know that Mike Denbrock would take that trade. I don't. And I think the only reason he'd even think about it is just experience. But the Notre Dame coaches had opportunities to look into the portal. And let's be honest about what the portal is nowadays. The portal isn't just the pick of guys that jumped in. The portal is the pick of whoever's in college football. And then you work behind the scenes to see if, hey, if you jumped in, we'd be interested and we might be able to offer, your client this amount of money. And you get somebody who knows somebody to reach out and make that conversation so it's not direct. But I can tell you this with 100% confidence right now. Maybe I shouldn't say 100, 99.999% confidence. The Notre Dame coaches looked at their room after the season and said, no, we're good. We like this room. Now, are there some people that aren't part of the coaching staff that might have done some back channeling? Maybe. But I can assure you that they weren't doing that on behalf of the coaching staff. They are very confident in this room. And not just for the present, but the present and the future. So I don't know if he would want to make that change. I think, but again, the experience would be the thing that would maybe give him pause of, if I could have this guy. But that's also why I don't think he would go with an Arch Manning or a DJ Lagway, because those guys don't have a ton of proven, high-level experience. They're incredible talents, but right now, if you were to go after DJ Lagway, for example, you're getting an incredible talent, but you're getting an incredible talent that, as of right now, all we know about him is that he completed less than 60% of his passes for less than 2,000 yards and had 12 touchdowns and 9 picks. Now, do I think DJ Lagway is going to be a much better player this year if healthy? Yes, I do. With Arch Manning, all we know is that a kid that started 2 games, looked good in one, didn't look that great in the other. That's all we know about him. I think if he was going to say, it'd be more of someone that's more of a proven commodity like a Cade Klubnik, maybe a Sam Levitt type of guy who's got a year under his belt now as a starter. But, I think Klubnik would be more of the known commodity. But there just aren't a lot of those. I don't think he would like Drew Aller as a quarterback. I think Drew Aller is one of those young players that is he either gets overhyped or underappreciated by fans. There's either this unnecessary Bo Nix type of disdain for him that people have, and then there's just let's pretend like he's the number one quarterback in the country and the top 10 NFL draft pick type of talent. He may be that. I don't know what the NFL thinks of him. I don't see it. And I don't think he would like a guy. He'd want someone a little bit more accurate, somebody that's a little bit more natural as a thrower. Somebody brought up Garrett Nussmeier. I don't think so. Garrett Nussmeier turns the ball over a ton, and Mike Denbrock does not like quarterbacks that are careless with the football at all. And Garrett Nussmeier is very careless with the football, in my opinion. So, and it wasn't just last year either. I mean, he's just someone that's always been a little careless with the football, a little more for my liking, and I don't think it's something that Mike Denbrock would be overly fond of either. I mean, I want to point something out about Garrett Nussmeier that just not a lot of people really want to discuss when evaluating him, but he's a kid that in his career has thrown 40 touchdown passes, which is good, but he's thrown 19 picks on 466 attempts or 744 attempts. So, that's a decent amount of interceptions. And last year he threw 12, but then 2022, he had 5 touchdowns, 4 picks as a redshirt freshman or true freshman in 2021. He threw 2 touchdowns and 2 picks. So he's never been a guy that was great at necessarily protecting the football. And we've saw that in games. I don't know that Nussmeier would be that guy. And no, Mike Denbrock did not recruit Garrett Nussmeier. He was there when he arrived. So, because he was there in 21, was his 21, 22, 23, 24. Yeah, this is his 5th year. He was already on campus when Mike Denbrock arrived. So there you go. That's my thoughts on quarterback.
Yeah, I know there's previous history there. I think Dante Moore would be an interesting discussion because he's younger. He is an elite arm talent, but he does have a year of starting under his belt at UCLA. And I would like to think that if Mike Denbrock is building his own offense, he would get Dante Moore some better supporting cast members than what he had at UCLA. That'd be an interesting one. But I'd probably also err on the side of experience as well. So, but a lot of those names would be in the conversation, I think, for sure.
It's a good way to start the show, Coach.
Yeah. Aiden Benami, do you think it hurts Notre Dame's chances going to 16 teams, 3 at-large spots? I doubt Notre Dame is ever below 16th in the rankings, if that's how they decide.
No, because there's what a lot of people that ask this question, and Aiden, you're not alone, don't seem to know, and because I don't know how much it's talked about, is Notre Dame has an automatic bid into the playoff if they fall within a certain ranking in these formats. So this notion that like Notre Dame's going to get left out of the playoff, no, they won't. Any conversation, and it was true of the 14-team conversation, it'll be true of the 12-team conversation. And I don't know what the actual number is, but as long as Notre Dame ranks within a certain range, they're in. So they're going to be fine because for all intents and purposes, Notre Dame has an automatic bid possibility as long as they're ranked high enough to be in there. And honestly, if they're not ranked that high, then they're probably not really a playoff team anyway, and I'm not overly concerned about it. So, no, I don't think it hurts them. I don't. Notre Dame will be fine. They'll be just fine.
Yeah, I was just about to say, once you start getting into the territory of them being further and further down in that 16-team spot anyways, I don't think we're going to have realistic conversations of if Notre Dame can make a run to the national championship. Because based on how this team is put together and what they did last season, that's kind of the frames of the conversation that we're having. And we don't believe that this is going to be a 2-year thing for them. And if Notre Dame, once they expand to 16 teams, if they come in at 15th, I don't think they're making who was the 15th ranked team this past season? Like Iowa State?
It might have been like Bama, Miami, somebody like that.
Okay.
Let me pull up the rankings here real quick, but there's a couple SEC teams in that kind of conversation.
Yeah.
There.
And all those SEC teams between Ole Miss and Bama and South Carolina, I don't think that any of them were in the national championship contender conversation, even if they did make the playoffs. So in a 16-team playoff, if they were to just go off of seeding last year, just ranking, Miami was 13th, Ole Miss was 14th, South Carolina was 15th, and Clemson was 16th. So, yeah, Notre Dame will be fine. Yep. And if Notre Dame's concerned about being ranked in the top 16, then they're not a very good team. It'd be like the 2019 team getting in. That team's not going anywhere. They might win a game in the first round, but they're not going anywhere. They're going on the road in the first game,
And what we learned about that team that year is they could beat Navy and a bunch of teams that were mediocre, but they couldn't beat anybody good. And so that kind of team, I'm not going to pound the table, be like, they're getting screwed. They're not, if Notre Dame finishes 5th and doesn't get in the playoffs in a 12 or 16 team playoff, then I'm like, yeah, they're getting screwed. But that's not an option. They would automatically be in that scenario. You couldn't leave them out.
Brandon Gilbert, who has been the worst ESPN college football analyst that is against Notre Dame, Mark May or Desmond Howard?
I'd say Desmond. I don't think Mark May was a bad analyst. That was a shtick that they had him and Lou doing. That was all a shtick. Mark May is a very intelligent guy, like very intelligent. That was just the shtick they did. And that's why it came across as so not genuine, is because he'd say these things that are just really dumb. And you're like, this is a really smart guy saying things that are dumb because he's playing a part, and it's not natural. It's like there's some roles like that Will Ferrell just does naturally because he's just a weird, strange, like out of guy, like Jim Carrey, or Vince Vaughn. Like there's some roles where like, dude, that guy was great in that role. Why? Because that's who he is, and that role was like him. And then there's others where you're like, I'm trying to think of the movie. There's a movie that Vince Vaughn was in. It was called like Dilemma. And I didn't find that one overly funny because it's like it was outside of his personality, and it just didn't come across as like as genuine as some others. And that's what I always felt about Mark May. Is this is a really intelligent guy who's being asked to not be intelligent so him and Lou Holtz can play this bit. Like Lou Holtz was kind of. I mean, there's a lot of people, especially younger people, that only know Lou Holtz really as that character of himself on ESPN, and I hated it. Like, that's not Lou Holtz. Like, that's basically a part him and Mark May are playing on this college football show. I hated it. And so, like, if Mark May was able to just be like a real analyst, I think he'd have been okay. He didn't like Notre Dame. Like, that part was genuine. Like, he genuinely didn't like Notre Dame. But so any chance he'd have taken shots in Notre Dame. But when Notre Dame was good, he'd have been willing to say, yeah, this team's really good. So I think Desmond's just not. I'll just leave it at that. I don't think Desmond's playing a part. I think that's who Desmond is. That's the difference for me.
Yeah, I think Desmond is just more of a Michigan guy. There's been times on College Game Day where he'll give Notre Dame some flowers. It's nothing earth-shattering, and it's always when they play like a significantly inferior opponent when he can't pick that other team. But I mean, with Desmond, he's just a Michigan guy. I mean, Michigan could have a matchup against the Miami Dolphins, and he would still pick Michigan in the big picks just because that's his thing. I get it. He played at Michigan. It's silly. It's the bit, but it is what it is.
Yeah, that's the thing though with Desmond is Trev. That's who he is. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's like, there's no depth there. That's my really big issue with Desmond is there's just no depth to him. There's maybe he is a really smart football guy. Maybe he is, and he just doesn't prepare. But like, there's just like the number of times where I'm like, dude, I don't even follow that team, and I know more about that team than you are. Like, what are you talking about? Like, yeah, that's like, I don't know how anyone that's done any research for this matchup is going to come away thinking what you just said is about these two teams is accurate. Like, I don't know how that's a thing. And that's my frustration. Like I felt like Lee Corso, I haven't liked the role they've had for Lee Corso for a number of years, but that's because he got really old. 20 years ago, Lee Corso gave some really good insights on the show. I look at it, Trev, and I just have never understood how Desmond Howard and Kirk Herbstreit became like the faces of college football. I don't get it. I don't think Kirk Herbstreit's all that talented. I don't think he's all that insightful. I don't think he's all that, deep. And these are the faces of college football. It blows my mind. Blows my mind. And then I see other guys, like I used to feel this way about like Jonathan Vilma. I'm like, Jonathan Vilma, I listen to him talking like sharp, and then he's just like gone. I don't even know where he is now. And it's like anytime there's somebody that's like really smart, like they just never get that push. It's always like the guys that toe the company line, and yeah, there's just too many of that.
Fair
Way
enough.
too much of that. I'm going to ask this one. All right, from Christopher Galloway. Picking only one and why you would play for this coach: Bo Schembechler, Woody Hayes, Joe Paterno, or Bear Bryant. Trevor Trowbridge, what say you if you could only play for one of those four coaches? Who would it be?
Well, one of those is automatically eliminated because I wouldn't be able to play on most of Bear Bryant's teams. I wouldn't be allowed on the roster. Probably
Why,
have
Trev?
to-
I don't understand why. You don't need to answer that question. Everybody knows the answer to that question.
Yeah, I'd have
Because
to
you
go
don't look
north.
like me.
I'd have to go north or west. Ideally, I'd be on one of the teams that helped push the integration for that school. But yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, I probably none. I don't know if I would fare well in some of these eras of football. I know Joe Paterno is a college football legend. Wouldn't want to play for him. That one's an interesting conversation. So, yeah, I mean, kind of a cop-out answer, but my answer would be neither or none.
I'd play for Bo. I would never play for Joe Paterno. I never liked Joe Paterno. I would never want to play for Woody Hayes. I'd be like, for Bear Bryant, like, well, how come my teammates, you're not recruiting my teammates? They're pretty good too. I always had respect for Bo Schembechler as a coach. I enjoyed beating Bo Schembechler as a coach. I would mind playing for him. I wouldn't mind playing for him. Maybe was it Miami of Ohio instead of Michigan. He didn't say I'd had to play for him at Michigan. So how about that? I'll play for the Miami, Ohio version of Bo Schembechler. How about them apples?
There we go.
So you like that? So there you go. There you go. All right, let's get to we have a couple super chats. We got one from John A1. Happy Friday, IB. Thank you, John. John's got some great questions coming up. We'll get to some here in a second. Then we got one from Steve Rolfe. There you go. Let's go.
Yeah, thank you for the super chat, Steve. What are your expectations from year 2 of Lauren Landau leading the strength program? Is there anything in particular you'd like to see?
If this team stays relatively healthy and they avoid the high number of knee injuries we saw last year, then I'll be able to say that was fluky, and all the other good things we see are what define him. So that honestly, that's it. We saw a team that was deep. We saw a team where players got stronger. We saw a team where players got faster. We saw a team where, a lot of young players are able to play a lot of snaps more than what we've seen in the past. I saw, guys that Notre Dame in December and January was still a pretty fresh, fast team. Part of that is that they play a lot of guys, but even then, you still had a lot of young guys playing a lot of snaps. And then you consider all the travel they had to do, because it's not just about playing a lot of games, but within their playoff game was the 19th, and the title game was the 20th. After the home game, you had to fly down to New Orleans and deal with all that stuff. Then you had to fly down to Miami. Then you had to fly down to Georgia. And so you were on the road a lot during that December, January period, and this team still stayed fresh and still played good football. They didn't lose to Ohio State because a strength conditioning program were wearing out, as the first drive of the game showed. So they just got beat by a team that was better prepared and executed at a higher level and those type of things, and had a lot of that very talented team. So in those regards, I love what I saw from the strength program last year, but the high level of injuries, especially the knee injuries, was concerning. So those things tend to happen. But if it's more fluky and not a weakness of the strength program, then they don't keep happening. And so that's something that I'm very curious to see. Good news is, so far, knock on wood, we didn't see anybody go down with a major knee injury during the spring, which we did last year. Obviously, Jabron Payne. You saw Kahano Kia get injured over the summer workouts with a knee injury. So as long as we don't see some of that stuff start to rise again, then I'm like, hey, I'm all aboard the Lauren Landau strength program, because a lot of good things were happening, but that's kind of a big deal. And we'll just have to see if that continues or not. So that's all I'm looking for from the strength program, because everything else, every box was checked. A young team stayed fresh for all year, and guys got better and guys got stronger and faster, and the conditioning was good. And they were great in the fourth quarter of a lot of games. put Georgia away in the fourth quarter, came back and beat Penn State in the fourth quarter, battled back against Ohio State in the fourth quarter, put Indiana away in the fourth quarter. I don't count like what Indiana did after they went up 27-3 as like Notre Dame wore down. They lost focus. Put USC away in the fourth quarter. Like that's the mark of a team that's in good shape. Is we're constantly better than, like, looking at it from a coach's standpoint as a head coach, like we're constantly the fresher, faster, more physical team in the fourth quarter. That tells me that my strength coach is doing his job well. I just would like to be able to do that in January with Riley Mills and Boubacar and Benjamin Morrison and, more of those guys. That would be the big thing.
Yeah. Yeah. He checked a lot of the boxes. I'm glad the soft tissue issue from 2023 went away. You weren't seeing as many, pulled hamstrings, stuff like that, the stuff that held out Greathouse during his freshman season. I'm going to be interested to see, like, kind of what's been sticking along the injury track. Like the shoulder, like chest, like pec type of injuries that have been going on. It happened with Jags last year, happened with Gerby Lambert, it happened with Davion Dixon. Those could also just be freak things too. I don't know if there's a causality to it, but that is something that it's ideally they make it
Dixon one. I think was something that was related to when he got to Notre Dame. There was an issue that they had to clean up. Okay. The Jalen Stroman thing was as well. So, but yeah, shoulders, neck, and knees are sort of those areas. And then if you have a lot of muscle injuries, those are the ones like Travis saying where I'm like, I think that's an issue to look at. But I just did want to Davion, I wanted to clarify real quick.
Okay.
I think that was something he inherited. But yeah, because it was Jagasol last year. It was Gerby this year.
Mm-hmm.
Right? CJ Carr had the elbow thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Yeah, that'll be one that I'm keeping my eye out on. It's nothing crazy alarming, but just if the trend continues, see how summer and fall camp go. And as long as some of the guys in the trenches remain healthy, then it'll be fine. But yeah.
Let's get to, I think that's the last of the super chat, so we can get back up top. Let's get to one of John A1's questions, because I know John had some good ones, but also he gave a super chat. So let's get to a couple of John's questions.
If the Notre Dame versus Clemson series does not count in the ACC agreement of 5 games, meaning half of Notre Dame's schedule will be against ACC teams, why not just join the ACC at that point?
So the other half of your games don't have to be against the ACC, or a good chunk of them don't have to be against the ACC. And now you're part of a conference that you don't want to be a part of. You want to be an independent team. If they do that, you still have 6 games that you can schedule against other opponents.
Yeah.
And the other thing about that is in 4 of those 12 years, it will count as one of the 5. So it's only even in the next 14 years, it's only 8 seasons where that's an issue. So, this is a pretty simple answer, John. It's because you'd no longer be an independent. You'd have even less flexibility of your schedule than you would have. And don't kid yourself that that's not part of the ACC's attempt here to negotiate, is to maybe see if that can be the thing. But no, Notre Dame would simply say, fine. Then, when this contract's up, we may be looking for other things. You know what I mean? If you're going to try to do that. But I have no problem with the ACC doing that. I have no problem with Notre Dame scheduling Clemson, and I have no problem with the ACC saying, hey, you need to make this a, conference game. Okay, fine. Then Notre Dame will negotiate and say, okay, well, we want to make some changes anyway, so we're going to drop a team from those future schedules. It's all part of the negotiation, but that's still 6 other games that you can schedule outside of your conference, as opposed to the rest of the league only having 4.
Agreed. Yeah. Also, in terms of what we talked about yesterday as well, that there's still 2 years until this is supposed to happen. So there's still time for negotiating. Plenty of time.
Yep. Let's see here. I like this one. Here, let's go to this one.
Under Chris Ash, do you believe the defense will try to be effective with more 4-man pressures?
Yes. I like the way John said it. Try to be more effective. Yes. I do believe this is an objective that the coaching staff wants to achieve, is they would like to be more able to rush the quarterback with 4 if they so choose.
Good deal.
Good questions, John. Let's get down here. We got one from Irish English. I'm going to ask you this one, Trev, because I don't have a clue. What will people be saying about this era of college football in 100 years?
Gosh. Yeah. I think big picture, I think this will kind of be a time to look back on, gosh, do you remember when NIL and the transfer portal was crazy? Ideally, changes happen to both of those things. It needs more regulated. It needs more – it honestly just needs more attention because right now it's just kind of chaos. People can transfer in the winter and then transfer again in the spring and then sit out if they're not getting paid the amount of money that they want to. They don't have to fulfill NIL obligations. You got teams that are tampering and offering – and I think in 100 years from now, I think they'll look back on this time as like and ideally it's not in 100 years. Ideally it's significantly sooner than 100 years. But I think they'll look back at this window of time, that 23 to 2026 range. Like, gosh, can you believe how college football was back then? Some version of us of Brian and I on their show for their team, or maybe it's the next Notre Dame podcast. Who knows? We talk, gosh, could you imagine what recruiting and maintaining a roster looked like in 2025? Like, gosh, that had to have been such a hard task. I'm saying that is ideally glass half full, and that changes because the way that it's going right now is not sustainable. So I hope those are the conversations going on in the next 100 years about college football.
In the next 100 years, I believe that I don't think that the story of how this era is going to be defined in 100 years has been written yet. And it's kind of like what you were saying, Trevor, is how the next year to two, if that, it may be quicker, is going to define how this era is evaluated. We're going to look back and say that's when college football began its descent, or we're going to say that's when college football truly became like just something really special. I think there's look, this is going to sound crazy to some. I get it. I think if college football handles the next 2 to 3 years the right way, there's an opportunity that the college football could eventually surpass the NFL in popularity for a host of reasons. But they've got to handle this time properly, and I have no faith that they will. So I think it just depends on how these next couple of years go. Do they properly implement revenue sharing, or do they do it in a way that makes the current problem even worse? Do we have a group of leadership that understands we can't just be the greedy what's we've been and try to put caps on this and caps on that and all these other type of things. Some things you cap, some things you just let the free market determine. Where I've said this before, rev share, it shouldn't even be capped. It should be just literally everybody gets the same amount. And then let the NIL stuff go. And as long as it's a real transaction, as I've talked about before, I'm trying to think who it was. I think was it Tim Priester that tweeted something out the other day where he was driving by a billboard and it was Drake Bowen advertising for some company. And it was Drake wearing a jersey, 34 jersey with the company's name on it. And he's like, this is what NIL is supposed to be. I'm like, amen. Exactly right. That's what NIL is supposed to be. It's stuff like that. And then if a company feels that Drake Bowen's worth $1 million to do that, then let God bless America, pay him $1 million. You know what I mean? But if there's got to be some of that going on, in my opinion. And then, of course, changing rules and getting back to part of making college football great is getting back to a time when regionality was more prominent than it is now, where Texas and Oklahoma aren't in a league of Southeastern schools. One of them was the primary school of the Southwest Conference, and they're now in the Southeastern Conference, where you've got two teams that basically are on the Pacific Ocean in the Atlantic Coast Conference. It's like, what are we doing? What are we doing here? If the changes that occur the next couple of years get us back to where regionality matters, where the Big Ten can say, hey, look, there's no need for you guys to be here anymore in this league because, whatever. So when the current deal runs out in the Big Ten for USC and UCLA, there's no need to be in that league because we fixed it. And I'll say this, the last month is the first time I've even felt remotely hopeful that college football is going to get fixed. And the reason I say that is there's people starting to speak up about how conferences negotiating for themselves actually tamps down how much money college football can make. And I think that's like, oh, thank God somebody's finally saying it. You know what I mean? And express it in ways that I didn't even think about, as far as like if you pulled it all together like the NFL, you'd actually make even more money. So there's people kind of saying, hey, look, we need some level of financial parity. I don't think financial parity automatically means that we're going to get on the field parity. And I don't care about that. I don't care as much about on the field parity. There's not, people say there's great parity in the NFL. No, there isn't. Not really. It's if you make good decisions, you can get good in the NFL. And the Lions made good hires. They hired a good GM. They hired a head coach that fit well with the GM. They've made great decisions. They have great scouting department, and they got good again. Right? Well, the Bengals aren't as willing to pay the money to do that, and other teams aren't. There's a reason why certain teams are picking in the top 10 every year. It's not because of fine. If you want to get good, you can get good. Where in Major League Baseball, the Cincinnati Reds can never be the LA Dodgers. Not for an extended period of time. It's impossible. The Cincinnati Reds, by the rules of the sport, the way the sport is, will never be able to repeat what they did in the 1970s. They could have the best scouting department in baseball and just get all the best, great. They kill the draft every year. They're great with international scouting and signing, but they literally will never be the Dodgers or be what the Reds were in the 70s, where they won 2 World Series, went to 2 others, but like they went to a World Series in like 70, got beat by either the A's or the Orioles, and then lost to the Orioles or A's. Like they lost at the A's once, the Orioles once, and then in 76 and 77 or 75 and 76, they won the World Series. And they were just for a decade, the dominant team in Major League Baseball. They'll never be able to do that again. They may have like that one good team, but then that next year, that team gets raided by the Yankees, the Red Sox, the Dodgers, the Braves, the Cubs, teams like that. Because of the rules prevent it. So baseball, that's the way it is. In NFL, if you want to be good, you can be good. Better hire the right people. That's where parity, to me, what true parity is if you make good decisions and you hire the right people, you can be good again. The system doesn't keep you down. That's what I love about the NFL structurally. Is parity is not everyone's 9-7. That's not parity. There's nobody else in the NFL that's done what the Chiefs have done. That's not parity. Parity is 1 year it's like this team, the next year it's that team, and there's just no dominant teams. That's not parity. Parity is you have an opportunity to do so. So that's kind of how I view it. And yeah, that's how I see it. So I'm seeing more people talking about that. You're starting to see the ACC and the Big 12 push back on this playoff thing a little bit. Like, no, we're not just going to roll over and die. What that tells me is, okay, good. They're not going to just take it. The next question is, but are they willing to sue for it? That's the thing that nobody talks about, because the ACC or the SEC and the Big 10 can bully those conferences when it gets to 2026. There's really not a lot they can do about it under the current structure, unless they do what? Okay, we're taking you to court. This isn't right. This isn't what we agreed to. Yes, technically you can do this, but if we'd have known you were going to try to do this crap, we would never have agreed to this. You're acting in bad faith. We're going to take you to court. Are they willing to do that? Well, having Pete Bavacqua speak out against it helps them, because now you also have Notre Dame backing you on top of the ACC and the Big 12. And I thought that was a very not discussed a lot thing, where Pete Bavacqua pushed back on the notion of the automatic bids. That was huge for the ACC and the Big 12. Because if Notre Dame just kind of sat back and took it, they'd be like, well, clear. Like if you're someone who was thinking that that Notre Dame eventually wanted to go to the Big 10, that announcement right there of Pete Bavacqua saying, no, we're not okay with this, is a big sign of, hey, we're not looking to join the Big 10. Because if they were thinking about joining the Big 10, then they would be, hey, it is what it is. We're going to have our spot. We're not worried about it. Because Pete Bavacqua speaking against it doesn't matter. Notre Dame's got a spot. Doesn't matter to them. But him pushing back on those automatic bids doesn't hurt Notre Dame. It's, I got your back, ACC. I thought that was big, and not enough people are talking about that. That was big that he did that. Very big.
Good deal.
All right, we got one from Tyler Evans.
Super chat from Tyler Evans. Thank you, Tyler. What would happen if Oklahoma and Texas join the Pac-10 when they have the opportunity to join?
I think that ultimately what would have happened is what we're saying now would have happened. They just would have left the Pac-12 to go to the SEC. The reality is the Pac-12 was never going to be able to survive in the current market, in my opinion, because of the terrible leadership they had. And that leadership would have eventually done in the league anyway. So, and again, when you just look out west, there's just not the hunger for college sports like there even was back then. And there wasn't like a huge of that amount. But part of the reason there was some sway back then is UCLA was coming, or USC was coming off of their great 10-year run. They weren't great when this move went down. It was like 2010, 2011, but they were close enough to where they were dominant that you saw a lot of excitement. Oregon was really just starting to get really hot as a program. And there's just this thought that, Stanford was really good. So there was a little bit more attention being paid to them in Northern California. So I look at it and say, man, it was never going to be sustainable because of the poor leadership they had. And then when those teams started kind of not being as good, we saw that at the heart of one of the issues out west is there's just not the passion for college sports like there is in the Southeast and in the Midwest. Just isn't. So I think eventually it would have happened anyway. Trev, what do you think?
Yeah, I think them moving to the Pac-10 or the Pac-12 would have made even less sense than them joining the SEC. But I think all roads would have led to them leaving the conference anyways. So, like, to your point, but I think that move would have made less sense than their move to the SEC when it did.
Yep.
So.
Yep. Andrew Gilmore says, Coach, the Dodgers model is way worse. Look at Ohtani's contract. Their goal is to win championships and sell the Dodgers before they have to pay the real money. That doesn't at all address anything I said, Andrew. And matter of fact, it actually speaks exactly my point, because they're willing to spend the De La Cruz kid becomes a free agent. If the Dodgers are in this mode, to your point, then they would overpay for him if they felt like he was the missing link to get them really good. That's the whole point. The Reds will never be able to contend with those teams when it comes to paying those players. It just won't. Just won't. You say you can talk about the Padres all you want, but the Padres haven't shown that they can do this for a sustainable period of time. They're good at this present moment, but can they do this over 10 years? That's the question that you need to find out. There's been times when the Reds were good, and then they had that small little window with like Joey Votto and Jay Bruce and Scott Rowland, and where they made the playoffs a couple times, and then guys, they couldn't afford this guy. They couldn't afford this guy. Then they gave Joey Votto that big contract. They had to let everybody else go, and they lost their window. What I said was not that they couldn't have a good team, but I said when you have that good team and you say they go win the World Series, you're going to then get that team rated by the Dodgers and the Yankees and the Cubs or any other team that's willing to spend that money, because you can't afford to keep the heart of your team together the way that teams like the Yankees can and the Red Sox can and things along those lines. So you're speaking specifically to the way in which the Dodgers ownership is handling the current situation, but that's a choice with how they manage it. It's not something that they have a say in how they're going to do it because of, like you said, and I don't know if that's true or not, Andrew. I'll take you at your word. You're a California guy, and I don't follow baseball like that anymore. But the point is, the Dodgers are choosing to go a certain way because they have revenue that a team like the Reds don't have. The Reds could never give Ohtani that contract. They couldn't even offer it to him if they wanted to. So it's a different type of situation. Unless you have an owner that already has buku bucks that he can spend on his own, you just the markets being what they are, and the fact that it's dominated by the markets, and they don't have the same sort of salary cap that we see in the NFL, is why you have a system that creates a lack of parity, and why certain teams just are going to have a very hard time being good. So that's what I'm talking about. Somebody's talking about the Royals. The Royals, remember they had that real small window where they got really good, and then what happened? Their team got rated. They couldn't afford to pay all those players. You had that window, and once that window's gone, you're done, where other teams can just keep throwing money at it. So it's just – and there are big market teams that don't spend money too. I mean, that's part of it. But the point is, The Bengals are cheapskates in the NFL, but they don't have to be. They choose to be. And not all teams are that way. The Lions said, hey, we're going to spend the money and we're going to hire good people because we want to win. And guess what? They made good hires and now they're winning. That's what I'm referring to. Let's get to some more. Got some great questions here without let's go to, we got this one from, it's a good one from Iden Banami. All your questions are good, Iden, but this one specifically is good for now that I want to bring up right now.
If you had to pick one between Mikael Blade or Drake Quinn, not solely on talent, but more so asking, is Chicago more important to Notre Dame right now than Atlanta? Obviously, both are important, but just in general.
I don't think there's a wrong answer here, Iden. I think if you were to say, hey, we're going to go with this kid because we see some really good trends in Chicago and all that, then I would understand that. But honestly, I would go with Drake Quinn if we're just talking about what has a greater impact regionally. Because Notre Dame can have success in Chicago without taking Mikael Blade. Taking a guy like Drake Quinn could be more beneficial to that because the reality is a kid from Chicago is not going to care as much. I mean, it helps, right, to have guys from your region, but it's not like you going from Chicago to South Bend is this big journey from another part of the country where, you got to see people from my area that can succeed there. No. There's some of that with maybe some kids, but for the most part, it's just not there. It's an hour and a half away. It's 2 hours away, depending on which part of Chicago you're from. So I just don't think it's as big of an issue. I mean, literally, Chicago's closer to South Bend, Indiana than Indianapolis is.
Sure is.
It's not that much further away than what Fort Wayne is from South Bend. So I just don't think that you need to create that pipeline quite as much as you do when talking about a region that's much further away. Like in Atlanta, like a Dallas, like an LA, a Phoenix, a Charlotte, things along those lines. So if we're talking about, let's say all things were equal as players, that's kind of how I take his question. Which player is most important from building a pipeline? And I think if you can really start to create a pipeline in the Atlanta area, whoa, yeah, give me that. Give me that. So that's where I would go with. Again, that's not an evaluation of the two players because I like the way that I then framed this and say not necessarily based on talent, but looking at it from this standpoint. It's a really good way of looking at it. But I would go with building that Atlanta pipeline because I just think it's easier to go in Chicago whenever you want to and get top players if you're winning.
Yeah. Yeah, fair enough. Super chat from Justin Fleming. Thank you, Justin. Hate to admit, in the post-Weiss era, I thought Notre Dame had to reduce academic standards to compete. So glad that Notre Dame never bought into that, and head coach Marcus Freeman is bringing in smart dudes who can ball out.
So Justin, by the way, is also a brand new Gold Club member. So he had been a member for a while, but Justin upgraded to the Gold Club. Justin, I greatly, greatly appreciate that, my man. But that's one of those things, and I'm glad he said this because that's one of those things that's come about in the Marcus Freeman era that has shown that lie to be what it was, which was a lie. And I understand why a lot of Notre Dame fans bought that lie because you were being fed that lie by people that we were supposed to trust. Brian Kelly and other coaches that would tell us that lie. Charlie's the only one that never used it prior to Marcus Freeman. Charlie Weiss is the only coach that I can, maybe he did and I just don't remember it, but Charlie Weiss is the only coach that I remember that never used academics as an excuse post Lou Holtz. And Lou Holtz sometimes would complain about it. Not so much publicly, but to certain people because they'd squeeze him on a recruit that he wanted. And some things like that. But that's because he had an adversarial administration. But Kelly complained about it. Davey whined about it all the time. But fans started to buy it because there was this thought of, well, if it wasn't true, then we'd be getting more good players, right? I mean, wouldn't that be the case? And it just came down to, no, I don't think that's it. There were other things that were keeping you from being good, on not just coaches not wanting to work, but your facilities for a long time were terrible. Your coach's pay was behind other programs for a long time, to where it's like you're not going to get top coaches or retain them as long as you'd like to because you're just not able to pay them the kind of money that they. I mean, why should I take if I can get paid $1 million at this school and Notre Dame's only willing to offer me $300,000, why would I take that job? Like, I got a family of sports. That's a big difference. And I'm using that a bit hyperbolically, but there was a time where Notre Dame wasn't sniffing what other top schools were when it came to, paying their coaches, and the facilities were way behind it. That's not true anymore. It's not even close to true anymore. And so as those things got eliminated, you come to realize that it really wasn't the academic thing. And there were kids out there that were willing to do certain things and that had that, but they also wanted to play championship football. It's kind of a big deal. It's like, it's just, I'm glad, very glad, Justin, as well, that lie got blown up and that we realized it was never that. Are there kids you can't recruit because of academics? Yeah, sure. Fine. So what? There's certain kids, a lot of schools can't recruit for certain reasons. So I'm glad that they blew that up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always hated the extreme takes on this narrative as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, what, Notre Dame only brings in kids that aren't great athletes, and the kids that they elected are just dumb. I always hated that notion in its entirety. Not saying that there's no truth to it, because like Notre Dame is a very high academic institution.
It's okay to admit there's certain players they couldn't have got into school.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah.
But Reggie Bush would have easily got into Notre Dame. Tim Tebow would have easily gotten into Notre Dame. Christian Wilkins from Clemson a couple years ago. Trevor Lawrence easily would have got into Notre Dame. Bryce Young would have easily got into Notre Dame. The Bryce Young from Alabama, not the one that they currently have. I mean, there's a lot of players that certainly could have got into Notre Dame coming out of high school. They just didn't want to come.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I mean, why would you have come to Notre Dame at certain times over certain programs? So that was more of an issue for sure. Brandon Rouse with a super chat. No mailbag, just a blessing. Love the show. God bless. Brandon, thank you so much. He just announced also he's going back to work. But hey, man, I appreciate you coming in for sure, man. I really, really appreciate that super chat. It means a lot. Josh Phillips just mentioned Andrew Luck. Perfect. I mean, think of all the players that Stanford beat Notre Dame for that became NFL players. Alex Carter, who's Tom Carter's son. Tom Carter's a first-round draft pick who played at Notre Dame. His son went to Stanford. Paulson Adebo, Andrew Luck. I mean, think of basically pick a kid from Stanford that was really good and he could have got into Notre Dame.
Christian McCaffrey.
Like Christian McCaffrey. Exactly. So there's plenty of players that could have come to Notre Dame and thrived academically. I mean, Myron Rolle went to Florida State in the Bobby Bowden era and literally was a Rhodes Scholar. He didn't pick Florida State because he wanted an easy academic path. He picked Florida State because he wanted a hard academic path, which he could have earned at Florida State if he wanted it, but he wanted to play football at a place like Florida State, not at Notre Dame back then. So yeah, I get it. It was never about academics. There were instances where you had an adversarial administration, but that was never true under Brian Kelly, ever. So I've never bought into that kind of stuff ever. It's like every kid at Ohio State can't read and write. Every kid at Alabama can't read and write. Like, is that what you're trying to tell me? Are there times when there are kids like that at some of the schools? I know that for a fact that there are. But trust me, there were plenty of players on that 2012 Alabama team that could have got into Notre Dame.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It's good stuff. Good stuff, Justin. I appreciate that, man. Let's go to – I'm going to get some that we haven't got anybody yet so far. Here we go.
Bobby S., do you think quarterback is the most important position in the 2027 class? To me, it is, because I like Hebert and Grubbs, but seeing them as a step down from Minchie and Carr. Thoughts, and who is your number one realistic quarterback?
I don't know that I agree with that. I think Blake Hebert's very similar to Kenny Minchie from a recruiting ranking standpoint for me. So I don't agree with your premise. So I think quarterback recruiting is always very important. I don't think it's the most important in 2027. It's in the top group. The reason I would say it is important is not so much that I don't have a lot of faith in Blake Hebert and Noah Grubbs. I do. I think Noah Grubbs is a very talented quarterback. I just think his recruiting ranking, I was actually thinking about this driving down the street the other day. Nobody talks about Noah Grubbs. And nobody asks us about Noah Grubbs. Why? Because he's not ranked very high. If he was ranked as a 5-star, we'd be talking about him all the time. we begin questions about him all the time. And we don't, because he's not ranked real high. And CJ eventually got dropped down by some, but he started very high. And then even, some of them started to drop him, which was nuts. But if he was ranked higher in the exact same player, I think some people would have a very different opinion than him. So I don't necessarily agree. I don't think either one of those guys are as good as CJ Carr. But there haven't been a lot of quarterbacks for anybody that I thought were as good as CJ Carr was coming out of high school. So I disagree on that. I think both of those guys are very good quarterbacks and good fits for the Mike Denbrock offense. The reason that I do think that it's big that they get certain guys in 27 is not because I lack faith in the two players before, but there's some studs in 2027. And I don't care. And so my feeling on the importance of landing one of those big-time quarterbacks in 27 would be the same if I thought that Noah Grubbs and Blake Hebert were both 5 stars, because anytime you get a chance to get a big-time quarterback, you take a big-time quarterback. And it also means that he's not going to play against you, which is a part of that as well. So I think it's a very important position in 27, but it's more because of how talented the 27 kids are, not because I have a lack of faith or a lack of being impressed by Blake Hebert and Noah Grubbs. Trevor, you've seen Blake Hebert throw live. You've seen him move around live. That kid's got impressive arm talent. Let me rephrase. He's got impressive arm strength. Yeah. I don't know if I'd say he's got elite arm talent yet, because that involves a lot more things like, timing, accuracy, stuff like that. But as far as just when that kid's dropping back in drills, that sucker looks really good coming out of his hand, and he's the best. I would argue, people talk about Kenny Minchie. I think Blake Hebert's probably the best runner they have at quarterback right now, outside of Anthony Rizak.
Yeah, I mean, he's just a physical specimen. He came in as an early enrollee when he was still supposed to be in high school and was automatically the biggest kid in the room. And he's like 6'3", 220 as an early enrollee true freshman. I mean, he has the size, he has the arm strength. He's just a little bit more raw than the other two. But, I mean, when we're talking about, Kenny Minchie's getting ready to go into his junior year of college, been with the program now, going on his third year. CJ Carr was always ahead mentally, where he, in comparison to other freshmen and early enrollees across the country, now, like, physically it's starting to catch up with him too. Not that he ever lacked physically, but now he just doesn't look like an early enrollee true freshman anymore. So comparing any quarterback on Notre Dame's roster to them, it was, you can always be like, oh, but these guys don't compare to them. It's like, I mean, yeah, now. But yeah, I'm with you on this. I'm with you. John A1, which player do you think is closer to reaching a point that they can break into the wide receiver rotation, KK Smith or Cam Williams?
I'd probably say KK right now, just because he has a better feel for the offense. I think Cam is more physically ready to help right now. I think Cam is stronger and he's fast as well, but KK is more nuanced as a route runner. He has a better grasp of the offense. So I'd say in that regard, KK's ahead. But if Cam can start to figure that part, if Cam can start to figure out the technical aspect of the position and the mental aspect of the position and just the drive it takes to be great, he'll pass up a lot of people really quickly. But I'd say right now, today, May 16th, KK's ahead.
Yeah, that's a good question, John. I think these players are really close, in my opinion. I mean, KK is going on to his junior season, and for different reasons, the light bulb fully hasn't clicked on for him yet. Cam's still pretty young. I'd say they're neck and neck for the reasons that Brian said. I mean, KK played more meaningful snaps last year than what Cam Williams did, so just by that logic, I'd probably put KK Smith edging him out a little bit. But once that light bulb goes on for Cam Williams, man, he won't be out of that rotation much longer.
I love this question from John A1, Trev. I want to get this one up too.
Yeah. If Jimmy Clausen and Golden Tate return for the 2010 season, does that team earn a trip to a New Year's Six? Do you think they would have won a New Year's Six?
I've been asked this before. If just Jimmy came back, I think this is true. If both of them come back, I mean, who beats them, Trevor? Besides maybe Stanford, but I don't know that that's a given either. I could see them in a shootout with Stanford just the way they were in 2009. Remember, in 2009, Stanford beat them by a touchdown, but they couldn't stop Stanford. They couldn't do a whole lot against them in 2010 either. But they just blitzed the heck out of Dane Chris at times, and then they drop 8 at other times. There's nothing they could do. Well, if you had Michael Floyd and Golden Tate and Tyler and Kyle Rudolph, you'd have had some different answers. There's some things you could have done with a Golden Tate against that team, but maybe Stanford beats them. They lost to Michigan by 4, and the only reason they lost that game is because Dane Chris got knocked out of the game. Every time he was in the game, they'd take the lead back. Well, actually, I shouldn't say that. When he was in the game, they had a lead. He got knocked out. Michigan took it back, and then Notre Dame kind of took that back until Michigan had that big play late in the game. You lose to Michigan State in overtime. They don't lose to Michigan State if those guys play. They don't lose to Navy in a neutral field if those guys are there, and they don't lose to Tulsa by a point if those two guys are there. So the only game maybe they lose is at home to Stanford. That's it. That gets them in the New Year's Six game, and I would have liked to seen how that team played in the New Year's Six game. I don't have a lot of faith they would have won it, to be completely honest with you, because that wasn't, as we found out, Brian Kelly wasn't great in those moments, and you still would have had Charlie Molnar as your offensive coordinator. And even Jimmy Clausen, Golden Tate, and Michael Floyd might not have been enough to overcome the ridiculousness of what a Charlie Molnar. Now, Brian Kelly called plays, but Charlie Molnar was putting the game plans together and stuff like that. I don't know that I have a lot of faith in the coaches to win a New Year's Six Bowl. Depends on who they played, but they'd had the talent to play with anybody that year. Because could you imagine what the 09 here's the way I look at it, Trevor. It's just like this. What is the Notre Dame's? We always talk about, well, what if this team went back? If you could put this defense from 24 and this defensive coaching staff on the 15 season, well, what if you put the 2010 defensive coaching staff with Bob Diaco and those guys on the 09 team with that offense? I mean, that's what we're talking about here. And then give them Ed Warner as the O-line coach instead of Frank Verducci. Like, that's a pretty good team. And they lost every game, was within one possession anyway. So, yeah, I think that team would have been really good if Jimmy and Golden would have both come back. But I think that team would have been really good if just Jimmy came back. Like, he was at a point in development where even Charlie Molnar couldn't screw that guy up like he screwed up Dan Christ. Because Jimmy had 3 years of starting experience. He just would have looked at Charlie Molnar and like, gotcha, coach, and then done whatever he wanted to do anyway, because that guy was a terrible coach. And Jimmy would have seen right through that. He wouldn't have listened to that guy. I wouldn't listen to that guy. So, yeah.
Knowing what we know now about who their head coach would have been at the time, I think they earned a trip to the New Year's Six just based off of pure talent on the roster alone. I don't think they would have won. I mean, that following year in 2011, that team went 8-5 with all the NFL talent that they had on that team. I mean, they weren't even New Year's Six eligible with that team. So it has nothing to do with the talent, because on paper, that team should have beat anybody or competed with anybody in the country in 2010. But it's who was driving the boat, man. And
you had a first-year starter quarterback, so he didn't have what it took to overcome the deficiencies you had from an offensive coaching standpoint. That's fair.
So
Jimmy would have. But that's why I say, Trev, I think we're on the same page. They're definitely playing a New Year's Six Bowl if they both.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
They would have had the talent to play with anybody, but the coaching was not up to par yet.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you say give me the 2012 coaching staff on the 2010 team, so no more Charlie Molnar, guys like that, then now we are having a different conversation. Very different conversation.
Super chat from Matt 2011 GT. Thank you, Matt. Appreciate the super chat. After Holtz, which head coach, so no Van Corder hire was the worst, and which was the best?
Talking about Notre Dame? I mean, clearly the best hire, in my opinion, was. I mean, are we including Marcus Freeman in that conversation? Because I think Marcus Freeman's the best. Pre-Marcus Freeman, it's Brian Kelly. I mean, look, I dislike a lot of things about Brian Kelly. He was still a much better football coach than Bob Davie, Ty Willingham, and Charlie Weiss. So I'd go with Brian Kelly. Like, if we're going to say let's take Marcus Freeman out because his story's still being written, then it's easily Brian Kelly. And I can say that and have no problem saying that. Even with all his issues, he still won way more than any of those other guys did.
Mm-hmm.
Worst is also easy. It's Ty Willingham. Well, actually, the worst hire was George O'Leary because the way that it went down, it made him look stupid. So, like, that was the worst decision, like, that they didn't do a better job of vetting and those type of things. But like as far as like a guy that stayed there, those were the worst optics. I think George O'Leary is a good football coach and would have done a solid job at Notre Dame. I think he'd have been very similar to Brian Kelly at Notre Dame. It just was started in 2002 instead of 2010. But the worst hire of a guy that stayed is Ty Willingham by a mile. I mean, he was from everyone I've ever talked to, really genuinely awesome human being. Just nice guy, respectful guy, cared about players, cared about them going to school and bettering themselves. But just from the football part, he was just not good at all. So he'd be my worst. And I don't think either of those are close.
Yeah, my lifetime, it's a relatively. I mean, it's Brian Kelly. I mean, up until Marcus Freeman was hired, Brian Kelly was the best Notre Dame coach of my lifetime. And I mean, even Ty Willingham, I agree with you on that. But I mean, I wasn't really like old enough to understand like what a good head coach was at that time, So, yeah.
But you can look back now and evaluate it.
Looking back now, yeah, it's definitely Ty Willingham.
Terrible recruiter.
Sure. But my answer, because he didn't say that we couldn't, it's Marcus Freeman.
Yeah. Got one more super chat here from, actually we got, holy moly, several just jumped in. So let's get to all those. But there was one from K Grant. Gap closer hoodie came in. Go Irish. That's awesome, dude. I really, really appreciate that. Actually, those aren't new super chats. Those are ones that were there before. I just didn't unstar them. So that's my bad. Let's get to this one from Domer Grizz.
Happy Friday. Is the 3-level combo of Young on the defensive line, Kingston Viliama Asa at linebacker, and Leonard Moore at cornerback the best 3-level combo of Notre Dame freshmen in your fan history? If not, who would it be?
Oh, man. I don't – hold on. Let me look something up real quick. I'd have to go back and look at that. I'd have to do some research into that and think through that a little bit more. It's certainly, if we're talking about high school, yeah, probably. But even then, I don't know that even then it would be, because like if you think back to the 2013 class, I mean, didn't Isaac Rochelle play as a freshman at Notre Dame? I believe he did, but give me a second to go look at that. I mean, part of me wants to say you're correct because some of those guys were more impactful, but my response, yeah, he did. Played 10 tackles, didn't play a ton. I just think that the 2013 team, and you had Cole Luke was in the rotation as a freshman, and Isaac Rochelle was in the rotation as a freshman, but Jalen Smith was just so good as a freshman. But as far as how they've played, I mean, I don't know that I can think of a better group that, as far as how they played as freshmen. Because like you could think back to like that great 1990 recruiting class Notre Dame had, but how many of those guys actually played as freshmen? I don't know that a lot of them did. So I'd have to think back to that, because like the 1990 class, Trev, you had Bryant Young and Jim Flanagan on the defensive line. You had Pete Bursich at linebacker, and you had Jeff Burris, Tom Carter at corner. Those are all studs. I don't know what all of them did as freshmen. I don't remember that long ago. Like, did they all play as freshmen? I don't remember, because that team was so loaded in 1990. I don't know that they all played or how they played, but of what I can remember, it's hard for me to think of anyone that's been better on an all 3 level. I'm just trying not to just jump into the easy route of, oh yes, I'm trying to really genuinely think through who might have been better. But it's like 2011, Aaron Lynch was a stud as a freshman, and Stephon too was pretty good too. But I don't remember any of the linebackers doing anything in 2011, and none of the DBs really did a whole lot in 2011. So I'd probably have to, because in 2011, so let's just look at this real quick. Like, I know you had Ben Council was a linebacker on that team in 2011, but I don't think Ben did a whole lot of anything as a freshman. I'm trying to think who the other linebackers would have been in that class. Let me pull this up real quick and look at it. Yeah, Jarrett Grace. He played, I believe Jarrett played as a freshman. Let me look this up real quick. Now, he could have been, if he wasn't hurt, he could have been a dude. Yeah, Jarrett redshirted as a freshman. Because remember back then you couldn't play a snap. But you had, Matthias Farley, Josh Atkinson, Jalen Brown, and Eiler Hardy in the secondary. None of those guys could come close to Leonard Moore. Linebackers weren't as good. So, anytime you think of a guy that had an impact as a freshman at one position, there just wasn't the other three. So, honestly, I kind of have to go with, I think it is, because I can't think of anybody that was better. I'd have to go back and really – what would be great is if I could just text Lou, because he'd be able to tell me. So, but I can't think of anybody.
Yeah, I got nobody. Yeah, when I saw this question come in, I've been thinking about this question since I started before the show started, and I nobody's coming to mind. To me, this is it. Irish Gordian Knot, was Grubbs the staff's number one quarterback? Lyons seemed like he was the guy to me, but it seemed they backed off and went with the more reliable prospect in Grubbs.
No, I never felt that Ryder Lyons was the number one. The way it was always told to me is that there was a small handful of players that were their A group, and they were going to take a guy from that group. Ryder Lyons also was never someone that the staff viewed as a 2026 quarterback. There was always this view of him of like, you kind of have to look at him as like he's a 2028 quarterback, maybe 2027, because he's been adamant he's going to take a Mormon mission. So you don't recruit him like Oregon's recruiting Ryder Lyons and they're recruiting him hard. I'm like, dude, there's people. I was asked, like, why would Oregon recruit him when they have a really good 2026 quarterback already? Excuse me, they're also trying to recruit Jared Curtis. Like, there was talk that they might take a commitment from him before Jared Curtis committed. I said, well, because they're not the same class. Like, if you think about it, they're not the same class, because he's going to go on a mission. So I don't know that he was viewed that same way. If they'd have got Ryder Lyons, I don't think they would have stopped recruiting Noel Grubbs and Brady Hart. So it was really Grubbs, Hart, and Lyons were the guys that the staff liked. They were in that A group. If Jared Curtis had any interest in Notre Dame, he would have been part of that A group as well. He just had no interest in Notre Dame. So it really, and I've said this to you guys before, it's not always a 1, 2, 3, 4 situation at position. Sometimes it's like, dude, we love all those kids and we'll just take the first one who wants to commit. And my understanding is that's how it was with that class. It's not that they thought Noah Grubbs was more reliable. I think that's kind of goes back to what we said earlier. There's a perception of Noah that he's something, a solid quarterback, but that's it because of the recruiting rankings. Maybe IGK has broken his film down and feels that way. I don't. I think Noah Grubbs is a top 100 player quarterback. Is he CJ Carr? No. Is he on the same level as Kenny Minchie coming out? Yes, absolutely. So I just have a different opinion of Noah Grubbs. I really do. And I think his game's going to take off when he gets to college too, because I think he's going to get a lot stronger in college. I think he's gone a little too far in the losing weight category in high school, and it's taken a little bit of some of the strength away. When he gets to Notre Dame and gets in the strength program here at Notre Dame, I think you're going to see that zip come back in his fastball. It's still pretty good, but that's kind of what I think about that. It's a fair question.
Yeah.
Thoughts on that, Trev? You weren't here when that recruitment was going down, right?
No, but I do think with Noah Grubbs, I think players that have been committed to the school for a long time also tend to fall to the wayside a little bit because they've been just a staple of that recruiting class for so long that the conversation around them, tends to drop off a little bit. Why would the conversations continue around Noah Grubbs to an outsider standpoint? Not saying that you are IGK. I'm just saying in general, you talk about rankings, for example. Like, why would a kid continue to move up or down in the rankings once they've been committed to a school now for over a year? And it's just kind of, I could see that being a little bit of the thing with Noah Grubbs too. It's the fact that he's not a headliner in terms of like quarterback recruiting right now for the 26 class. Has been associated with Notre Dame for so long. Adam Garcia, what would need to happen for Marcus Freeman and Notre Dame to go on a dynasty run? And do you think it's plausible?
I think it's plausible, yes. I think Notre Dame is one of the few programs that in this modern era of NIL can have sustained success. I don't think it's easy. I think the number of schools, I think what NIL has done and the modern transfer portal has done is it's given more teams the ability to quickly jump into that top group. But I think it's also made it harder for more schools to stay there. And so I think Notre Dame is one of those small handful of schools that has the resources, the reputation, the money, all the different things that you need to win and win big and win consistently if you have the right coach. I think Ohio State's in that category. I think Georgia's in that category where they could. I think Bama's in that category. There's Texas is in that category. There aren't a lot of teams that fit that mold. When I look at what Notre Dame needs to do to get there, it really is going to come down to you've got to continue to recruit at a high level. And I think that there's an area where you can kind of upgrade to a degree in certain areas. They're starting to. Like if what we're seeing happen right now in the D line becomes like a normal thing, then that's one of those final missing pieces. But for me, the part of that, which is what I think is the biggest unknown, is if Notre Dame's going to be a dynasty, there's coaches on the current staff who won't be a part of a big chunk of it. Whether that's, and I don't know who that's going to be. Mike Mickens a lot of people are just assuming he's gone after this year for different reasons. And I don't know that that's necessarily true. You know, he may just say, you know what, man, I love it here. I want my daughter to grow up here and I'm going to stay here, you know, whatever the case may be. I don't know. I mean, he may be gone after this year. I don't know. But I can assure you of this, no coaching staff stays together intact for 10 years outside of like the Division III level where you've got like two full-time coaches. It's the head coach and the two coordinators are buddies of his, and they don't have aspirations of their own of moving up. And then the rest of the coaching staff are just volunteers from the area that aren't looking to move up in coaching. Outside of something like that, I mean, guys are going to move on. Guys are going to retire. Guys are going to get head coaching jobs. And so the big thing is going to be Marcus Freeman is going to have to be able to continue hiring at a high level. When you lose great coaches, replace them with great coaches. He did that this offseason at running back. We'll find out if he did that at defensive coordinator. But it's when you lose an Al Golden and replace him with Chris Ash, it needs to be a hit. It needs to be the right hire. And if you do make a bad hire, which he will do at some point in time, the reason I know that is because every coach does that, then you've got to recognize it quickly and move on from it quickly. Those are going to be the big things. And the final piece for me is that Marcus Freeman has to stay hungry when it comes to the football parts of doing his job. The biggest challenge at being the head coach of Notre Dame can oftentimes be all the obligations you have to be the face of the football program and institution. I got to fly out to here to do this. I got to fly out to there to do that. I got to fly over here to meet this group. I got to go fly over here to shake hands with this booster. I got to go fly down here to meet with this Notre Dame club and all those type of things. And that can be a challenge. And it can be distracting to where you lose sight of the football piece. That can be an issue. So as long as he can hire well and not fall into that trap, then yes, Notre Dame can have a 10-year run where they win a couple titles, play for a couple more, and they're just relatively consistently in the Final Four to Elite Eight. Like a down year for Notre Dame is like, think about this with Kirby Smart. It's kind of like that, where the down year for Kirby Smart, you went 11-3 and won the SEC. Like, okay, they weren't a championship contender last year. We said it before the season. We said it before that game. Guys, this is not the Georgia of old. It's still very good, but it's not the Georgia of old. Notre Dame has a better roster. It's years like that where you lose a lot the NFL the next year. You're 10-2 again. You're in the playoff as an 8 seed, but you're not really a title contender. Those are the down years. That's possible at Notre Dame, but it's going to require those type of things because that's how the recruiting still stays strong. Right? The reason I focus on the coaching hires, Trevor, and the other thing is because that's how Notre Dame stays strong. If those things are happening, then the recruiting stays strong. If he's doing those things from a coaching standpoint, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely plausible. I think we have to look at a dynasty run differently than what it may have meant before in the past because of the expanded playoffs. Like we're just in this day and age, we're never going to see, in my opinion, a run like what Alabama had again. Like I don't think we're going to see national championship winners in 9 and 11 and 12 and then 15 and then 17 and then 20. I don't. I've been saying this adamantly. To me, it's all about the road to the Final Four teams, the road to the semifinals. Because I think once you get to that stage, you've now whittled out the 4 best teams in college football in that year. And like we saw these past 2 games, the games could go either way. I don't fall into the bucket of people that are like, oh, the Penn State game was never in doubt. I don't believe that it was. That was a very back and forth game. And I mean, Texas was a, 4th down conversion away. I mean, arguably probably a better 3rd down play call away from potentially making that game interesting. So anything can happen when you get to that level. So that's what I view more as a dynastic run for Notre Dame with winning a couple titles in there. But I don't want it to be a conversation where, it's like, yeah, Notre Dame can win titles in 25 and 26 and 28 and 29 and 31. And it's like, I don't know about that.
Yeah. But see in your lifetime, Trevor, you that's what you experienced. But that hadn't happened before. Like what Nick Saban did at Alabama hasn't been done. And like you had that, like, I don't even think Miami, you could even say the Miami of the 80s was that, because their run was in a much shorter time frame. It was like a decade and it was gone. They won, I think their first title was, like 84. When did Howard Schnellenberger win the title? I think it was 1984. And then they won a bunch of championships. Like they won in 87, 89, I think 91. So their first title was in 83, and then by 91, they won a title, and then they didn't win again for a decade in a completely different situation, and they haven't won again since then. Like, it lasted a decade. What made Alabama so unique is that it went longer than that. Their dominance went longer than that. Not just winning, but also being in that. That was a unique thing. To me, that's not the standard. The standard is closer to what Ohio State did. Like, that's more in line with what the kind of dynasty we're talking about. So in the last 10, 11 years, Ohio State's won 2 titles. They've been in the Final Four. They were in the Final Four. They won it in 14. They were in the Final Four in 16. They were in the Final Four in 19. They were in the Final Four in 20. They were in the Final Four in 22. And then they won it again in 24. But every year they were top 5 to 8 team every year. Their down years, they didn't make the playoffs to 12-1. Ohio State in a 12-team playoff era would have been in the semifinals more times than they were. That 18 team would have had a shot to win to get to the Final Four. The 15 team might have won it all if they would have gotten a 12-team playoff. Like, that 15 Ohio State team was the most talented team in college football in 2015. Like, that team was insane, but they didn't have great leadership. That team reminded me a lot of this year's Ohio State team. This year's Ohio State team wasn't as talented, but I'm making the point that we're like, if they can get to the postseason, they're going to be dangerous. That 15 Ohio State team, if they get to the postseason, might have beat everybody. That was the Ezekiel Elliott, Joey Bosa, Michael Thomas. I mean, that team was loaded. And that would have been a dangerous team in a 12-team playoff. There would have been more years they would have been a Final Four team in an expanded playoff. That's what a modern dynasty is more about to me, than comparing it to Alabama. So you're correct. But even if we were still in the old era, I don't think what Bama did is doable again, because it was unique. Sure. And it was primarily driven by Nick Saban and some other big time. Nick Saban also benefited, he was phenomenal, greatest coach of our generation. But he also benefited from, there were times during his tenure where there just was nobody like him in his league. Like, you had that little brief period of time with Urban Meyer, but he won a title when Urban was still at Florida. So you give him credit for that. But if Urban was not such a grinder and just the person he is, and he would have been able to stay at Florida for a decade, LSU probably doesn't win back-to-back titles in 11 and 12, because in one of those years, Florida probably knocks him out of the playoff. You know what I mean? Like, that's my thing, is he benefited a little bit from that. Like, who was the great coach that he had to go toe-to-toe with once Urban retired from the SEC?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, probably Kirby when he went to Georgia.
and Kirby still couldn't beat him. Except, and the one year he did beat him for the championship, that was a rematch from a game they got smacked by Alabama in the SEC championship. So, and that Alabama team was missing Jamison Williams. They were missing John Mechie. Like, if they weren't torn up by injuries, they don't beat Alabama in that game either. So, but yeah, that's the point. Is like there wasn't there wasn't that same level of that counterweight that a lot of teams have had over the years. And that's partly why Florida State was able to have the success they had for so long, because once they joined the ACC, there was nobody ever in their level in that league. And it almost guaranteed them a certain number of wins. So that doesn't take away from Bobby Bowden's greatness or Nick Saban's greatness, but I just think that a lot of factors went into the level of greatness that he had that is even beyond the fact he is also great. And that's what I'm getting to. So I don't think that's the standard for a dynasty. But I think I don't think what Miami did in the 80s is necessarily my standard for a dynasty. It is a dynasty, but I don't know, like, it's if you're not that, you're not a dynasty. If you don't win in 83, 87, 89, if you don't win 4, and that's to your point, is I don't think Miami, like, you could argue that Miami, you could make a case that Miami would have won more titles back then in an expanded playoff, or you could also make the case less. There's years that, like, I don't know if they would have won a rematch and, or if they would have wanted to play that Notre Dame team. I've said this before, 89 rematch between Notre Dame and Miami, Notre Dame wins that. But the counter to that, if you're a Miami fan, could be, yeah, well, if we get a rematch against you on a neutral field in 1988, we win that. Fair. That's what I think can kind of add a little bit of juice to this. But you don't know, but that it does make it harder. There's more opportunities to get beat. It's not just that one game or those 2 games. And I think that does make it harder to win the number of titles. That's why I like what you said, Trev, is it's going to be more so about how many Final Four appearances are you having? How many times you get to the title game is going to have a big role in a dynasty beyond just, like, because you could win it in 15. Let's say Notre Dame wins it in 25, and they win it again in 2035. That doesn't mean that in between those 10 years they were a dynasty. Because I look at it and say, well, it's like LSU won a title in 07, they won a title in 19, but were they a dynasty in between that? No, they weren't. But they could have been, in theory, if they were constantly, a top 5 team the way Florida State was. Like, Florida State in the 90s was a dynasty to me. They won 2 titles, 93 and 99. That's like that. But they were top 5 every year. That's what I say. I think Florida State in the 90s, Ohio State now, those are more in line with what I think modern dynasties in this new era are going to look like, to your point, Trev. So I'm kind of giving a little bit of an old man context to the discussion, because I think you hit the nail on the head. I don't think these new rules allow for the Bama dominance, but I don't know that was going to happen anyway.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and that's, to your point, it's not specific to just Notre Dame. I don't think any team's going to do that.
Right, exactly.
So and ideally in a Notre Dame dynasty, I hear the points about Ohio State. They were always in the conversation. Ideally, if it's a Notre Dame dynasty, I don't want there to be 10 seasons in between championships for it to be considered a dynasty, ideally. But, that's because they played for it in 20, I believe. They lost to Bama. But outside of that, Ohio State. Yeah, they played for it in 20 and then didn't play for it in any other year outside of 14 and 24 where they won.
Yeah.
I think.
They won it in 14, they won it 24. They were in the title game in 2020. Every other time that they were in it, they got beat in the first round. So, like, they got beat by Clemson 31-0 in 16. They made it again in 19. Clemson beat them. I forget what the final score of that game was, but it was like a field goal game. Justin Fields got picked off in the end zone at the end of the game. Very close, competitive game. Great game. One of the best one of the best Final Four playoff games we've ever had. It was a phenomenal game. 2 loaded football teams. And then they made they didn't make it in 20. I mean, excuse me, they made the championship game in 20, didn't make it in 21, got beat by Georgia at 42-41 in the semis in 2022. So the only years that they went 2-1 in title games from 14 to 24. So, yeah. But still, that's dynasty because you were there. They're down years where 11-2 seasons and 12, 13, like one of their years they didn't make the playoff. They went 13-1. And it was the year they got smashed by Purdue in 18 in the regular season, which knocked them out. That's one of those teams where I'm like, dude, if that team's in a 12-team playoff, they might have another Final Four appearance. I don't know if that team had win-it-all capability, but they had get to the Final Four capability for sure.
Yeah.
That team was not going to beat 2018 Clemson. I don't know that team could beat 2018 Oklahoma or even 2018 Alabama, but those were going to be teams that were going to beat them, which would have been, in 14, would have been in the Final Four.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I look at it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Got another super chat pop up from Beefeater. Thank you.
If Notre Dame keeps getting to the national championship and clearing $15 million, 90% or more than other participants, how long before other self-sustaining programs see this and decide to go independent as well? Who would be the first to go? Would it be Texas?
I don't think that you're going to see anybody else go independent, because those schools won't necessarily have the bargaining power that Notre Dame does, which is why Notre Dame is unique in that regard. Somebody, I think Archer in the chat earlier had said something like, Ohio State could thrive in an independent. I don't know that they can. Maybe. I don't know that they can. I think we're being a bit, I don't want to say it because it's going to come across as insulting, and I don't at all mean it to be. I just don't know how to express it in any other way. But if a team was, to answer Beefeater's question, if a team was going to try it, I put Texas in my top 3 list of schools who may try it. The one thing that Archer said that I think is factual is I don't know that Ohio State would have the appetite for leaving the Big Ten, even if they thought they could do it. No, I don't. And I agree with him on that regard. I don't think that I could see Michigan trying to get out of the Big Ten before I could see Ohio State. I think Michigan and Penn State would try to get out before Ohio State would, even if they thought they could thrive on their own. I just don't. I think being a Big Ten school is ingrained in the DNA of being a Buckeye fan. And I can say that as someone who grew up in that era. I don't think that there'd be that same appetite for it. I think Michigan's always looked at themselves as kind of the snotty, we're a better academic school than you, we're better than you. I could see them trying some nonsense like that if they thought that they could thrive as an independent. I think Penn State, if they thought they could be an independent, would go back to being an independent. So I think there's some, but Texas is certainly in the top of my list of schools that would maybe try that if they felt they could get the kind of deals that Notre Dame could get. I just don't think that they can.
While we're on the topic of things that Archer has said in the chat, I agree that Clemson semifinal game was a robbery, because I think that Justin Ross thing was a catch, just like I thought that Anthony Gonzalez had that catch in the Fiesta Bowl when Notre Dame played them. So that was also a catch that Tom Zbikowski returned for a touchdown. I agree.
Tied the game, I believe, right?
Mm-hmm. So I agree.
Or actually would have given Notre Dame the lead, or would have tied it? Wasn't it 24-20? I would have given Notre Dame the lead.
Yeah,
in the fourth
I think
quarter.
you're right.
Yeah.
But either way, I agree with you that both things were a robbery.
I love that, Trev. The look on your face right now is so awesome. I'm so happy right now. I was just loving it. Oh, let's see here. Here we go. This is a good one. Really good one.
Aiden Benami. Last year was exceptional with next man up and backfilling. It was a masterclass. What one position this upcoming season can Notre Dame not afford to lose a player?
Tight end is always like the first one that pops in my head. I'm very concerned about what does that position look like if Eli Raridon goes down. I'm very concerned about it. After that, I'd probably say corner, simply because I think there's a bigger drop-off between the starting corners and who might step in talent-wise, and partly due to experience. And then not a position group, but a specific player, Malachi Fields at receiver. And not that Jaden Greathouse may not be better, but like if Jaden Greathouse goes down for some reason, you have other players that can play that position and still thrive at that position, even if it's not as good as how he did. They don't have anyone, in my opinion, outside of Micah Gilbert that I could say is going to go in and even play boundary on a consistent basis, much less thrive at it. So I think he'd probably be my next one.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up.
Can I say this? I actually want to move that one up to number 2 on my list, ahead of corner.
I'm glad you brought up receivers because I made a note after yesterday's show, and I want to probably put out some content around, like, we talk about injury history and the position rooms that have kind of been hit with the injury bug. The wide receiver room is in that conversation. We don't talk about it a lot. You look at the makeup of the room, really outside of Malachi Fields. I don't know what his injury history was prior to his 2023 season, but you go through and you look at the makeup of the room.
You mean 22 season? 22
No,
is when he missed all but one game because of an injury.
Okay, well, I was saying I didn't know if he had injury history.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, his sophomore year, he got hurt in the first game and missed the rest of the year, but he's been fine since. He had like a little minor shoulder thing he got cleaned up in this offseason, but nothing that's cost him games.
I got you. But you look at that room as a whole and the injury history that belonged in there. I mean, Will Pauling was 75% throughout the spring. Jordan Faison couldn't stay healthy last season. Jaden Greathouse missed a lot of his freshman year, was in and out of the lineup with the hamstring injury. And then behind that, you have some high ceiling kids, but that are relatively inexperienced. And we talked about KK Smith, who also has had his fair share of injuries. He has some things that he has to work on. Cam Williams is still really raw. Logan Saldate is pretty raw. Elijah Burris, best of the 3 freshmen, best in terms of the spring that they had. But I would put that at wide receiver. We've talked a lot about Notre Dame's passing game taking a jump. And if that position gets hit with injuries again and there's inconsistencies in the lineup, not even talking about like season-ending injuries, but games if people miss 2 to 3 games at a time, like what Jordan Faison did last season, or if Will Pauling can't stay healthy in the lineup, that would be a concern for me. That would be I don't know if Notre Dame can lose a person there. Tight end is still the first because after Eli Raritan, it is a lot of question marks. But behind that, it's the receiver room as a whole for me because I don't know what that starts to look like. To Brian's point, I don't know who replaces Malachi Fields. Who do you slide in for Jaden Greathouse? Probably Will Pauling, who was injured last season. Faison kicks out to Z, who was injured half of last season. And then you're one injury away from like, ooh, okay. So that's the position group for me that I think health is going to play a big role too. Christopher Galloway, if you had to listen to one song once a day for the rest of your life, what would it be? Mine would, of course, be Mr. Blue Sky. That's a great song.
I've never even thought about that. Oh man, that's actually I'm trying to look up the name because it would probably be This Man by Jeremy Camp.
I like that.
If I could only listen to one song, it would probably be that. Yeah.
If you had to listen to one song just once a day,
like it's the only song you could listen to for the rest of your life, it would probably be that. Yeah.
Gosh, that's tough because I'm a huge music guy. I don't because I have music that I listen to depending on the mood that I'm in, depending on the kind of day that it is outside.
That's how I am with music, Trev. It's very much how am I feeling. Yeah.
I'd go Gotta Be Real by Cheryl Lynn. I love that song. Listen to that song all the time in the car, especially when it's sunny, drive with the windows down. That'd probably be mine.
Dig it.
John A1 last year with a 2-parter. John A1 last year, due to player skill set, the run game was prioritized. Did the prioritization of having a dominant run impact who started on the offensive line? If so, this year it seems the team will have a balanced attack. Do you see any potential changes to personnel use on the offensive line given the particular change in schematic emphasis?
I think it also, no, I don't think we're going to see any changes because of them being a more balanced team. But that's because I think the guys that are slated to start are guys that I think Joe Rudolph thinks can do both. I think the big change last year, the big decision last year that was geared towards the run game was starting Sam Pendleton. And Sam Pendleton had a lot of struggles in his time as a starter. But you could also say that if you took the best 10 blocks of the first 5 games or 6 games, because he came back in what game? Billy came back in game, what was it? Game
whatever game
8?
Navy was.
That'd have been game 8, right? Stanford was game 6, and then Navy was Georgia Tech was game 7.
Yeah, so Navy
Came back in game 8. So if you take the 10 best individual blocks of the first 8 games, there's a good chance Sam Pendleton's got like 3 or 4 of them at least. When he was good, it was impressive stuff. He just really struggled in other times. And I think the decision to start him was because Joe Rudolph felt that he was a more dominant run blocker. So I think your assessment is on point. I don't know that Joe Rudolph views Anthony Knapp as a liability in a balanced offense the way that maybe a lot of us think that he is, if you're someone who assumes he's not going to get any better in year 2 than what he was in year 1. So I don't know that he's like, well, we need to be a more balanced team, so we need to get Anthony Knapp out of there and put so-and-so in. I don't think that's how he sees it. I think Joe Rudolph believes that Anthony Knapp is going to take a big jump in year 2 as a pass blocker. I genuinely think he believes that. I don't think Joe Rudolph doesn't think Anthony Knapp is good, but he's my recruit. I think the fact that he's my recruit is why I think Joe Rudolph sometimes thinks he's better than he is, but because it's his evaluation that he trusts. But I don't think Joe Rudolph is nuts for thinking Anthony Knapp's going to get better in year 2. I think it's more nuts of people who don't think he's going to get better in year 2. That doesn't mean that he still should be the starting left tackle. That's a different debate, different discussion. The notion is that there's a lot of people thinking that 2025 is going to be rough and with the offensive line if in a passing or more balanced offense because of, well, did you watch Anthony Knapp last year? I did. I talked a lot about it. But why are you assuming he's not going to get any better going from his true freshman year to his true sophomore year? Wasn't like he was like a redshirt junior that stepped in the starting lineup and he just kind of is what he is. And this is a true freshman. So I don't think that Joe Rudolph sees it the way that maybe we do. But if he did, if Joe Rudolph was like, listen, I love Anthony Knapp, but he ain't pass blocking at left tackle in a passing heavy offense, which is not doing it. I think he would have made a change and moved Anthony Knapp to center this spring. I flat out believe that. Because I think he's smart enough to understand we got to make sure we have an offensive line that's designed to implement what we're going to do as a football team. So, yeah, I do think he would do that in theory. I just don't know the specific makeup of this offensive line requires any adjustments if you're going to be a more balanced team.
Fair enough. Yeah, I'm with you. Bobby S., do you see the committee honestly putting in a 10-win Notre Dame team into the playoffs? I'm thinking it's going to have to be 11 wins to make it, although I'm very confident we get 11 or more.
Why are you moving the goalposts, Bobby? That's my first question. Because a year ago it was, well, you can't get in unless you're undefeated. Like Notre Dame's got to go undefeated to get in. Well, they went 11-1 and had a loss to Northern Illinois. So I think we as Notre Dame fans need to stop kind of feeling like everything is rigged against Notre Dame. There's bias in the media towards Notre Dame. The playoff committee has never shown a bias towards Notre Dame that's negative. If anything, I would argue that any bias towards Notre Dame in the playoff committee has been more so pro Notre Dame bias.
Oh, yeah, look at 2021.
And 2020, where Notre Dame gets smacked in the ACC title game and still makes the playoff. So the committee, it's about money for them and for ESPN, and Notre Dame is good for business. The specific of would they put a 10-win Notre Dame team in the playoff, it depends on what their schedule was and what's the makeup of other teams in college football. Last year, if Notre Dame was 10-2, like I said this, we said after Northern Illinois, they can't lose another game or they're out. But by the time we got to the USC game, we're like, I think they're still in if they lose to USC. They're just not going to host. They still would have probably got in over SMU. Like, they still would have probably got in over Indiana at 10. I mean, let's be honest about that. They would have probably been in over at least one of those two teams. They would have probably been in over Tennessee. I think a 10-2 Notre Dame team is still probably ranked higher than Tennessee, potentially ranked higher than Tennessee. So last year, the makeup was such that they would have got in, I still think, with 2 losses. This year may not. It depends on the year. Just like there's years where I'm like, dude, Notre Dame does not have to go undefeated to get into the Final Four, guys. In 2018, they would have needed to. In 2020, they didn't need to. And, it depends on the year. But in theory, a 10-2 Notre Dame team absolutely can make a 12 or a 16-team playoff, especially 16-team playoff. But yes, they will absolutely, committee will, if Notre Dame is deserving of being in the playoffs with 2 losses, the committee will absolutely put Notre Dame in because they like making money. That's what this whole thing's about.
Yeah, you touched on it, but a lot of it's about what happens around them. I mean, take Notre Dame out of the equation for a second. Do I think Ohio State still makes the playoffs last year, even if Alabama didn't drop that game to Oklahoma and Miami doesn't lose twice in the month of November? I do. I don't think they host. But even then, Ohio State got in at 8th, and they lost in the final week of the regular season at home to a 6-5 football team, and they still got in at 10-2. And
we're ranked higher than Tennessee, ranked higher than Indiana, ranked higher than SMU.
Yeah. I don't pay attention to wins as much. I mean, I do within a certain degree, because there are some people that are, like, well, Alabama should have made it. And it's like, well, no, they didn't reach double-digit wins, and they had bad losses. That was an example that I heard thrown out a lot, or the whole Miami case. Like, they're a 10-win football team. How did they not? It's like, because even some of their wins shouldn't have been wins. That Cal game was ugly. Virginia Tech game was ugly. So it does still, it matters how you win and who you beat. And so all those are very valid, but a lot of it depends on what happens around you.
Yeah. Somebody in the chat said ranking Penn State ahead of Notre Dame seems pretty biased. No, it didn't. It was a very consistent way of them looking at it. Just like keeping Texas ahead of Notre Dame, despite having 2 losses, was not it was a bias, but it wasn't an anti-Notre Dame bias. Mm-hmm. It was we're trying to protect the conference championships bias, which is why SMU also got in. Mm. So it was a bias, but it was we don't want it to be perceived that conference championship teams are going to get punished by playing in a conference championship. That's why. So how are we going to, and I don't agree with it, because I think you should look at the whole resume, and that's part of the deal. If you don't want to get punished for playing in that, then get rid of the conference championship games. But I think Notre Dame's resume was better than Penn State's once Penn State lost to Oregon the way that they did. I do. I think Texas's resume was not as impressive as Notre Dame's once they lost a second time to Georgia. But what the committee did, and were consistent with, because it was true with how they ranked Texas, it was true with how they ranked Penn State, but it's also true in why they kept SMU in the playoff despite losing to a 3-loss Clemson team and then getting their second loss. Think about that. A 2-loss SMU is going to make the college football playoff, but a 2-loss Notre Dame team won't. Like, you guys do know that SMU was not undefeated when they went to play Clemson. They lost to BYU in September. A 2-loss Clemson, or a 2-loss SMU team is going to make the college football playoffs, but they're not going to put a 2-loss Notre Dame team in. So, Josh, to your point, it was a bias, but it wasn't an anti-Notre Dame bias. So that's that. But Notre Dame still got in and still hosted. They didn't hold it. Like, a lot of people wanted Notre Dame not be in because once you lose to Northern Illinois, you don't deserve to be in the playoff. That's an anti-Notre Dame bias. Committee said, no, they're still going to be in and they're going to host. So, yes, that is absolutely. So, a year after we saw a 2-loss SMU team get in, a 2-loss Ohio State team get in, that really only had, they had 2 big wins all year, got beat at home by to your point, Trev, 6-5 team who was not very good. They still got in and hosted. A 2-loss Tennessee team got in that had some not good losses and not a ton of great wins. And a 2-loss SMU team got in all at-larges. But we're questioning whether or not the committee would put a 2-loss Notre Dame team in the playoff. Of course they would, if they deserve it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Super chat from Craig Sebring. Thank you, Craig. Appreciate the super chat. If CJ Carr wins a job at quarterback, could you see Mike Denbrock use Kenny Minchey in a form of the Wildcat?
No, I don't. I just don't think Kenny is a good athlete and a good runner, but I don't think he's not Tyler Buckner as a runner. Like if Tyler Buckner was, let's say Tyler was stayed at Notre Dame and never left. And let's just say he never quite developed as a passer enough to start, but he stayed. He was the backup to Sam Hartman in 23. He was Riley's backup last year, and he went into 2025 offseason, battled CJ Carr and got beat out by CJ Carr, but said, dude, I love Notre Dame. I'm not going anywhere. Would I say, would there be a red zone short yardage package for Tyler Buckner quarterback? Yes, there would be. But Kenny's not that. So the only way to me that you would put Kenny Minchey in a Wildcat is if you promised him something like that in order to get him to stay. I just don't think he's that type of runner that you would need to do something like that for. I didn't see it in high school. I haven't seen it in Notre Dame. I have no evidence that he's that type of runner. They didn't do that kind of stuff with him in the spring. Now you can say, well, that's because of blue gold game. Agree. You're not going to submit him to that. But what evidence do we have that he's anything other than a scrambler? We have none. So I just don't think he's that. Whereas Tyler Buckner rushed for 1,400 yards and over 20 touchdowns as a junior in high school. We had evidence that he was that kind of runner. We don't have that with Kenny. So unless they promised him something like that to keep him to stay, then I don't see it. Plus, I'm just not doing things to take the ball out of the hands of either CJ Carr or Jeremiah Love, Jadarian Price, or Kedron Young. I'm just not. To me, there's no point of that. I don't know what value that adds to your offense. I think you're doing that just to make him happy. I don't think you're actually putting the best player on your team in a situation like that on the field. And that's why I use the Tyler Buckner example from if he would have stayed, then that's a different story. I wouldn't do that with Tyler now, though. And I'd still even have some questions about it because I'd be like, do I really want to take the ball? But the difference like Tyler's, you could run some read zone stuff where you could still give the ball to those guys. And then Tyler's also a dynamic weapon. I don't think Kenny's that type of runner. He's really athletic, but being athletic doesn't make you a runner. That's my 2 cents on that.
No, yeah, you and I see that the same. Yeah. There's not a skill set that Kenny Minchey has as a runner that would make him a preference over Jeremiah Love or Jadarian Price or Kedron Young or Aeneas Williams.
Agree. I agree. Really, really good stuff. Man, you guys have had some great questions. Let's keep this thing rolling. All right, we got the dynasty one. Some of these I haven't unstarred, so I got to make sure that we're here. I'm going to ask this one from I.M. Tenzin. Little non-football question here. This is for you, Trev. This is more for Trev since BD is hardcore MD only. Have you had a chance to sip any of the new flavors of soda from Coke, Dr. Pepper, Sprite, etc.? I really like the orange cream Coke.
The orange cream Coke is really good. I don't drink a whole lot of soda. Whenever I do, it's typically at the movie theater. Like that's kind of like my movie theater beverage. But I go to the movies all the time. Well, not all the time, but more than like once every quarter. So that's really the only time I ever do. I can't tell you the last time I bought soda like for the house or for the apartment. So, but yes, I have tried the orange cream Coke. It is very good. It is very good.
Let's move down here to got another one from Domer Grizz.
Other than consuming every bit of content IB dishes out, what tips do you have for us fans to survive the long off season?
Well, engage in the message board. Do that. But I also, you know what I like doing in the off season, Trevor, is going back and watching games. And not just games from this past season. You know what I'm going to do? I'm actually going to do this right now so I don't forget. I'm going to start this. Let me go here real quick. Let me get that one. And I'm going to do this because in the past I've gone and put past seasons YouTube games in one thread where I put all the YouTube games from a season that I can find. And I'm going to go find that and do that again. But that's what I like to do is just consume stuff that's not related to this season because there's only so much you can say about this team beyond what we already do. I mean, we kind of cover it pretty thoroughly. So that's what I would do. And then find a couple national podcasts that you like. CFB Nation, we have our podcast. So Bill Bender and Bill Trocchi, I just put podcast up there. If you guys are subscribers, if you are podcast listeners and you're not a subscriber to the CFB Nation podcast, I'm actually going to put the link here below. I would like to this summer do more stuff on there. One thing we're going to do at some point in time, and it's going to come probably closer to when Vince is starting to do shows with us, but we're going to have a mailbag one day. We're going to pick a Friday. We're going to have a mailbag on CFB Nation, and it's going to be a college football mailbag. You can ask some Notre Dame questions, but it's geared towards, we're going to talk about a lot of other teams. So we're really trying to grow that channel, and there's some content that I'm going to start doing on that as well. So you're going to want to check out that CFB Nation podcast. But, they put a show out every week. Find some national podcasts that talk about, all of college football. I'd say if there's try to find maybe some podcasts of teams that you are interested in. I don't know how good Ohio State's going to be this year. Let me find some, I think things like that are always advantageous, but honestly, I think it's just about engaging on the board and watching games and studying the team and just kind of take some things that we talk about, go back and watch the games and see if you can kind of, okay, I see what they're saying, or at least even if you don't agree, you see what we're saying. And then that, I think, can maybe help you see the game a little bit differently also. That would be my advice for you, Domer Grizz. On top of, as you said, consuming every bit of content. That's first. Getting all the Notre Dame content from IB is obviously first.
I would urge everybody, on top of listening to podcasts nationally, I would just do your own research on some teams. I found that really helpful in the offseason. I get it. Before I started working here at Irish Breakdown, I was obsessed over every little thing Notre Dame. But to Brian's point, there's only so much that you can do, honestly. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to start educating myself on other teams around the country. So if I were to get into a debate with, say, another fan, or see something come out that I don't agree with or that I had questions about, I would have my own foundation of information that I could have an opinion based on, not just looking at the headline of an article. Not saying that any of you guys do that, but that was just for me specifically. And then another thing, don't let this interfere with consuming every bit of IB content. But honestly, one thing that's helped me over the last couple seasons too is kind of removing myself a little bit, because there's a lot of, especially once the season comes, Notre Dame football gets real dense and a lot happens really quickly. And it's, you're drinking out of a fire hose once season starts, fall camp starts. So I'm not saying completely detach yourself, but take a couple days over the summer, spread out, just kind of, turn your brain off for a little bit. Everybody
after the IB show's over, you mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I've said one thing I want to do this summer, Trev, I've said is I really want to find a book. I have lots of books, but I want to grab a book, and I'd really like to start making time to just sit down and read.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I'll be able to do that, but I'm going to try to make myself do that. See.
Yeah.
We'll see. We'll see if that's successful or not.
Mark Avalone, if the USC rivalry game had to occur in the first 3 weeks of the season, like Purdue, Michigan State games, with Notre Dame tend to be to accommodate to the Big Ten schedule games, would it have the same cachet?
Oh, absolutely. It's still a big game. It's still a big moment. And in a lot of years, it probably would have had even more, because it would have been before USC fell apart and they would have been ranked higher. So, I think it would. There's rivalries that happen. The Notre Dame Michigan, everybody tells me they want the Notre Dame Michigan game back. That was a great ride. I love the Notre Dame Michigan rivalry. They should have it back. And they should. That was almost always within the first few games of the year.
Yeah.
I don't remember many times that happened long later than fifth game of the year. I'm actually going to look that up and see kind of when does Winsipedia show when the games were played? Yes, they do. So the latest that they played would have the 19 game. Remember that at Michigan? That was in late October. I don't remember a game ever being played that late. So if you go back and look when I was started really following Notre Dame in 88, they played in September 10th, 16th, 15th, 14th, 12th, 11th, 10th, 27th, and 97 was late. 5th, 4th, 14th, 13th, 11th, 10th, 16th, 15th, 13th, 12th, 11th, 10th, 22nd, which was in 2012, the 7th, the 6th, and the 1st. So 2018, first game of the year. Did that make that in? Matter of fact, it was a huge game because you spent the whole offseason talking about Notre Dame versus Michigan. So absolutely. Like if Notre Dame was playing like Temple in week 1 and USC in week 2, and USC was preseason considered a really good team, we'd spend all offseason talking about how big that Notre Dame USC game is going to be in week 2. We don't care about Temple. We'll talk about Temple when we get to Temple week. Right now, we're going to focus on USC. So I absolutely think it would still have a lot of cachet. Certainly. But it doesn't have to be that. If anything, move every game to the end of the year. Move every Notre Dame USC game to the last week of the regular season. Ohio State and Michigan do that. And then, okay, but they're in the same conference. Okay, cool. South Carolina and Clemson do that. Florida State do that. They play their big rival last game of the year out of conference last game of the year. So why can't Notre Dame and USC do that? We do that every other year already. Why? Oh, nah, we know why. We know why. USC doesn't want to play in late November Notre Dame weather. That's why.
I was about to say, because parkas are really hard to fit in an overhead carrier.
They're very expensive.
That's why. Come on now. Yeah, I think the Red River is another big rivalry that happens. It's not in the beginning of the season, but it's definitely not at the end. It's always like the second week of October. It's always around like that week, like 6 mark. So, yeah, I mean, it definitely I think it definitely would have the same for sure. PJC 1122 is identifying the actual best player in high school more accurate today with the huge recruiting history, or back in the pre-internet days when fewer people were covering high school football?
Oh, I don't. I think if it's easier today, has nothing to do with people covering the team. It's just easier to get film now than it used to be. It's easier to get access to film. Back in the day, if I wanted to watch a kid, I had, like just look at like the 80s and 90s, just even before VHS, different story. That's why a lot of people recruited regionally, because like it's kids we got out and saw. We could, why did Texas recruit Texas all the time? Because that's the kids they knew about. They weren't going all over the place as much. So, I think it comes down to a lot of that, Trevor, it's just access to, who can you see? Who do you have access to? Then VHS came along and made it a little bit easier, but it was still like how'd you get it to them? You had to send it in mail. You had to, like when I got into coaching, like when I was at Duquesne, we'd played teams that were further away. And when I was, so we'd have to, sometimes I'd have to drive as the GA. I'd have to drive, like my position was GA as a receivers coach, but like, you only had like 2 full-time coaches. And so I'd have to get the film, drive it to the airport, hop it on a plane, and it gets sent out to New York or whatever. And then when I was, my first couple years as a coach, like when I was at Wittenberg, for example, I had to get in the car and go meet the guys like me for the other team halfway between us and their school, and we'd exchange film. Now it's like, okay, I want to send that game. So copy, send, put in email address, hit the send button, and that guy's got, access to my film. So like, it's just easier to see more kids now. And there's way more people in your offices to watch film, where back in the day, like it was the coaches and like Notre Dame had like one recruiting guy. And then after Vinny left, it was really just kind of like the coaches doing a lot of that. Now it's like you got a whole like organization, like you have a whole department that's just geared towards doing all of that for you. That makes it a lot easier. Certainly makes it a lot easier. It's access to film that the internet has changed. It has nothing to do with rivals and 247. And in some ways, I think they've hurt, because you start having schools that start caring more about recruiting rankings. And I know for a fact, I think I've said this about Georgia. I've been told, I just know this for a fact. I've been told by people close to the Georgia program that some coaches have bonuses built into their contracts for landing number 1 recruiting classes or landing 5-star players. So I'm going to focus on that kind of guy. Like, we're focused on, hey, these camps, and we got this kid and that kid. And I think sometimes some guys get exposure and other guys get overlooked, and some schools are just lazy with that stuff. So if anything, I think that's hurt access more than helped. The internet's been great for getting more young men more access to getting their film to college coaches and be found. The ease of travel makes it easier now also. It's easier for Notre Dame to go out and see the entire country than it was before. Notre Dame, it was a challenge for Notre Dame, but now it's also easier for everybody else to kind of do that also.
Yeah.
And so those are just different things that you look at. Like I'm looking at Texas's 1970 roster, and I'm actually still trying to find someone who's not from Texas on that team. Oh, here we go. Bobby Mitchell was from Colorado. And Mike Rohn was from Tennessee. Rob Schultz was from Tennessee. John Ulrich was from Michigan. And I think that was it. That was it of their entire roster of guys not from Texas.
Wow.
That's it. Just because you were recruiting your region. And that's what made Notre Dame so unique, is they recruited everywhere. But even then, it's still, there was one year, I have to find it, Trev. There was one year where I looked at Notre Dame's recruiting class, and it was like one of the 80s years, and it's like there was like a bunch of kids from Texas in that class, and you're just like, good Lord. I mean, not Texas, I'm sorry. Chicago. And I'm just like, good Lord, like that is a lot. Like that is a lot of dudes. I have to try to find that. I had a thing where I had a bunch of past seasons on there. If I could try to find it, I'll look at it. See, past rosters. So let me see if I can find this. Give me a second. Yeah, so here's Notre Dame's 1989 roster. They had 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Let's see here. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 guys that were from 18 guys. Zorich was cut off. 17 guys from the Chicago area, scholarship players from the Chicago area, meaning like either Chicago or like one of the suburbs or cities right outside of Chicago. You're not going to have that many guys from Chicago now. But so like even then when they were a national, I mean, I'm looking at their roster. Arnold Ollie's from California. Sean Anderson was from Nebraska. You had Steve Bells from Arizona. You had Ned Bolkar from Virginia or New Jersey. You had Mike Brennan was from Maryland. The Brooks brothers were from Oklahoma. Derek Brown was from Florida. Rocket Ismail was from Pennsylvania. You had guys from Ohio, guys from Florida. Demetrius DeBose was from Washington. So they were always a national program, but even there was always that core of like really good players that were from the Chicago area. You had Zorich on that team in '89 that was from there. Tim Grunhard is from Illinois, from Chicago area. Jeff Alm was from the Chicago area. Bryant Young was from the Chicago area. Like, you still had that big old base that they don't really have now. But it's easier. You can survive with it because it's so much easier to get outside and travel. But that's also, it's easier for Texas to come up to Ohio or to go to Jersey or go to California and recruit kids too. All those things have factored into it. It has nothing to do with more people covering the sport, in my opinion. Very good question.
Yeah.
Very good question.
Good question. Berto 2121. Were the polls back before media-driven outlets in the BCS era more journalistic-based and not narrative-driven as they are today? Does that put more weight in polls decades ago?
No. They were every bit as biased and driven by other things than just trying to be honest than they are now. That's why the BCS era came about. It's just people tired of like, why are journalists picking a college championship, champions? And there were years where people felt that Notre Dame was getting the benefit that they shouldn't have. Like the year that they were number 5 going, I think it was 70. Was it 73? Oh boy. But there was a year, I think it was 1973. Hold on a second. But they were 5th going into the Cotton Bowl against number 1 Texas. And Notre Dame blasted Texas in that game. And no, it wasn't 73 because they were undefeated. Was it 77? Give me a second, folks. I'm going to look that up. Was it 77? Was it the Divine team? Yes. They were number 5 going into the Cotton Bowl against number 1 Texas. And they blasted Texas 38-10. And there were some other teams that lost, and they vaulted all the way up to number 1. Some people have a problem with that. Look, and then the counter is that the same people gave Florida State the championship over Notre Dame in 1993, despite the fact Notre Dame winning the head-to-head, And that same group of that same group of reporters in 1989 gave Miami the title over Notre Dame because the excuse was they won the head-to-head. Notre Dame's resume was far more impressive, but Miami won the head-to-head. Well, 4 years later, that head-to-head didn't matter a whole lot now, did it? Despite the fact Notre Dame lost to a very good top 15 Boston college team. It's not like they lost a Northern Illinois caliber team. So there was just as much complaining about it back then as there is now. It's just there's always going to be complaining about who wins championships because it's not my team. There's always going to be some you go to 16, there's going to be people complaining about, well, this team should have been in the top 16, not that team. That's never going away. It's never going away. You literally allow every team to have a shot at the playoffs like they do in Indiana high school football. Well, we shouldn't have been matched up against that team. It's not fair because we were seeded. There's always going to be people complaining. Having your champion decided by not journalists is definitely the way to go. We could make it better than it is now, but I do not. I mean, look at how garbage the AP polls and stuff are now. It was no different back then. It really wasn't. I don't think it was better.
It is so hard for me to imagine playing in a game to maybe win the national championship and hope that people just deemed you the national champions.
Yes, vote you won, yes.
That is a crazy thought to me. Legit. In any sport, like it's weird to think that you didn't play a national title game. Like, I mean,
sometimes you would, like 88 when Notre Dame beat West Virginia. If Notre Dame won, they're the champs because they were number one. But if you weren't number one, it wasn't a given unless you were number two playing number one. So, I mean, there was a couple times that happened, Trevor, but there was a lot of times where it was.
That's so crazy.
It was not that. It was not that. Yeah. Sorry to cut you off, but there were some times when it was, yeah, that's the title game. But it was rare. It was very, very rare.
Man.
Like I always talk about that 95 Nebraska team. That was 1 Nebraska versus 2 Florida. The winner of that game's the champ. But it wasn't always the case. Like when Notre Dame beat West Virginia in 1988, if Notre Dame would have lost, it doesn't mean, to your point, it was a championship game for Notre Dame. It wasn't a championship game for West Virginia because that game was played on January 2nd. I believe Miami had played the day before. Miami played later that night, actually. So West Virginia would have needed to wait until the Orange Bowl between number 2 Miami and number 6 Nebraska to see who won it all. I kind of like what I've advocated for. The way to do the postseason is play the bowl games just like you used to play the bowl games. And after that, pick your 4. Because now there's more clarity on who those top 4 teams are. That's what I've always felt was the best way to still have the regular season. Because, look, if you're in the Big Ten team, you're going to have a tough time getting in the Final Four if you're not in the Rose Bowl. You better hope you get to the Rose Bowl if you want to have a shot to get to play for the national championship. So now the Rose Bowl has more meaning. The regular season has more meaning. And then you pick your 4 after that. And now it's like if it's like back then, that was kind of the thing that sucked about it, was also kind of the thing that brought intrigue because now you'd have had a bunch of West Virginia fans watching that Orange Bowl between Miami and Nebraska to see, okay, who's it going to be now? So there's still some kind of coolness to that in regard to if it would have been to pick your 4. But to your point, you got to sit back and hope that the voters, and then even then, are they still going to vote somebody ahead of us? Would they have gone to take them? There's so much that went into it that very rarely was it just a no-brainer of 1 versus 2 and the winner wins it all. It was often not that way.
Yeah. To pick bowl teams, that would have been really cool. But to decide the national champion, I would have hated every aspect of it. Just how I imagine being a West Virginia team and your chance at winning a national championship lays in the balance of something you can't handle on the football field entirely. Hate that. Yep. I hate every aspect of that. Yep.
I mean, and part of it, the thing too, is there was a time, and some of it's being somewhat discussed in the chat, but there was a time, Trev, when one of the big national championships they picked their champion before the bowl games. So that's why Notre Dame and Alabama both claim the 1973 national championship. Alabama claims it because they were awarded the national champions. They were undefeated before the bowl game. But then Notre Dame came out. So like Notre Dame in 1973 finished the year 4th in the coaches poll. Because the coaches poll which it wasn't called the coaches poll then, but it's what became the coaches poll. I think it was UPI maybe. But they gave their champion before the bowl games, where the Associated Press gave their championship after the bowl game. So Alabama claims a national championship in 1973 in a year where Notre Dame beat them 24-23 in the Sugar Bowl. And that's where Notre Dame got their championship. So it was a hot mess. So, no, it was not better back then. Notre Dame won it in the AP, the football writers, the NFF, and then Alabama won it on the what it was the coaches poll. I don't think it was called the coaches poll then. I think it was called something else then. But, yeah, it was a mess.
Alabama won it in the
journalists were deciding who won national championships.
Alabama won the national championship in the Crimson Tide Gazette.
Yes. UPI, Coach Bentz. Yes, it was UPI.
Good Lord.
So, yeah, it was definitely not better. Definitely was not better.
AJ Sullivan, Josh Pate said yesterday that Notre Dame didn't trust themselves to throw the ball last year. Thoughts on this and his defense of the rankings he put out?
I don't know what Notre Dame not throwing the ball last year has anything to do with where this team should be ranked. I don't remember hearing that. If anything, that should add credibility to just how good Notre Dame was. That they beat Georgia, they beat at Penn State, they beat Indiana, and were a team that were afraid to throw the football, or however he said it. I didn't catch that part of it, but if you don't trust yourselves to throw and you still go out there and make it to the national championship game, doesn't that lend credence to just how talented your football team would be? And what does that have to do with this year? I don't know what that has to do with this year. Are you assuming that it's because Mike Denbrock doesn't trust himself to throw the football, even though he had Jaden Daniels and did what they did a couple years? Like, I don't understand why those two things would have anything to do with each other. What does Notre Dame not trusting themselves to throw last year have to do with where you rank them this year? I don't follow that logic, and or what the specifics of the argument was. I'd have to go back and watch it.
I listened to it,
okay.
And it was just more setting up his conversation for this year. Not Notre Dame was scared to throw the ball last year, so this is where I have them ranked. It was more of a
what was the relevance of why he's setting up this year? What was
because now they have a quarterback that's more willing to push the ball down the field this year. It was more like that. It wasn't. I have Notre Dame ranked 7th in my post spring because they were afraid of.
But if you're saying that about them last year, now they do have that. Then again, what's the argument for having them more? I mean, I listened to part of it. I didn't remember him saying that, and it was about. I don't even think that his issue having them 6 was that he doesn't think highly of Notre Dame. It's more so he's overrating LSU and teams like that. I think it's flawed argument. I think Josh Pate still looks at Notre Dame as a team that doesn't recruit top 10 classes, and he puts a lot of emphasis on that, as opposed to thinking like maybe, just maybe, they got it wrong with Notre Dame recruits for certain reasons. And maybe, just maybe, the Notre Dame players are better than you think that they are.
Mm-hmm.
And so it doesn't make a lot of sense, but they didn't always trust themselves to throw the football. That's not actually bad analysis of that football team. That's fair analysis of that football team, especially like early, middle of the year. I think they were more comfortable letting Riley throw it later in the year, but I think that's a fair analysis of last year's team. I just don't know what that would have to do with this year's team.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's go to this one from Irish Dragon 23.
There are many college football experts that always spin Notre Dame's successes, no matter what, and automatically label Notre Dame as overhyped. Who do you see as perennial overhyped teams in this day and age?
Penn State. I mean, constantly getting the benefit of the doubt in rankings, constantly overhyped. Up until Jimbo got fired, Texas A&M was that. I would even argue that Texas is still that to a degree. How are you going to justify having Texas as the preseason number 1 when they lost all the players they lost, other than just overhyping them? Now, does that mean Texas has no chance of winning it. Of course, they absolutely have a chance to win it all. But why does this is the whole point of our show yesterday, Trev. Why does Notre Dame have to prove this, and this to get the benefit of the doubt? But Texas has given it when Notre Dame literally went further than Texas last year. You say, well, Texas has lost. Ohio State was more competitive than Notre Dame's. Well, actually, it wasn't. If you're going to look at the final score, both teams had chances late in the game to make a play to give their team a chance to tie it. Notre Dame needed to stop defensively. Texas needed to score. But they also had a head-to-head where Texas lost twice to Georgia and Notre Dame beat them. So, I mean, they had the same margin of victory against Texas A&M. So why does Texas get the benefit? Well, they got Arch Manning. Well, okay, what does that mean? They had to completely rebuild their interior, their defensive line with portal guys. They had to, go out and get some portal guys at receiver to replace some guys they lost. They got some good, talented young players, Ryan Wingo, DeAndre Moore coming back. They had to go to the portal to replace their tight end. They lost 4 starting offensive linemen. They lost their star cornerback. Why are they getting the benefit of doubt? Notre Dame's not. That's the whole point of this. Part of that is a Notre Dame bias. I'll say anti-Notre Dame bias, but a bias of you're still holding on to Notre Dame being what they were prior to Marcus Freeman. And then the other part is every time Texas gets good, they start overhyping Texas. That's just the Texas is back, baby. I mean, and they may be. This may be the year Sark gets over the top, but shouldn't he have to get to play for the title once before we start chucking them up to the number 1 team in the country? Michigan was that way for a long time up until 2021. They were always getting preseason love. Anybody else pop in your mind right now, Trevor? Perennial overhyped teams. I mean, there's going to be a team here, a team there in different years, but just a team that's perennial besides Penn State. And I mean, that's always the big one for me is Penn State.
It's to a different degree because I don't think they're ever in a preseason top 7, but I think Iowa is overhyped every year. They've been the same team for a very long time. Yeah. And every year they are in the top 20 without fail. And they're always going to go. I mean, back when it was just the Big Ten West, they would just get credit for, they're the best team in the Big Ten West. It's amongst Northwestern and Purdue. And it's I mean, obviously they are the best team in the Big Ten West. Wisconsin hasn't been what they have been in a while. Nebraska's a perennial 6, 7, and 5 team. So I would put Iowa in that. It's not to the same degree, but I always, whenever the rankings come out, I always pay attention to where Iowa goes because it's same conversation every year. I
will admit, I always put Iowa higher than they end up ranking because it's every year. It's this is the quarterback that finally figures it out. This is the year, and that's the thing is it's true of this year's team. They're always a really good team other than quarterback. And then, of course, when his son was the OC. But, yeah, I think that's a good one. I actually would say right now in the current era, the last few years, Oklahoma has been very, very overrated. The fact that there are people putting a team that has had 2 6-7 seasons in the last 3 years as a preseason top 10 team, and their best year was they have yet to even sniff the top 10. If I am correct, they weren't close to being a top 10 team in the year they went 10-3, if I remember correctly. Let me pull that season up. What did they finish that year? They finished 15th in 2023. And that's the only year he's finished ranked. They got all the way up to number 6, shouldn't have. And then they got beat by Kansas, and then they got beat by Oklahoma State and dropped to 17, climbed all the way up to 12, got beat by Arizona by 2 touchdowns in a bowl game and fell to 15. That's literally the best year that Brent Venables has had by a mile in his 3 years there. 6-7, 10-3, 6-7. And that team is preseason top 10 for reasons. They're in there. They're in there. They're an overrated team. Yep.
Agreed. Yep.
I just love saying this one. PQ, what to do? I'm sorry. I just love saying that name.
I love it. Is it reasonable to expect the offense to be as good in short yardage and goal-to-go situations without a mobile quarterback as Riley starting this year? Could there be a special package for these?
Is it reasonable to expect the offense to be as good in short yardage and goal-to-go situations without a mobile quarterback as Riley was last year? Yes, I think it's reasonable. But what it means is this. Number one, you need the O-line to play better. And I think it should. The O-line needs to be willing to do a better job in those situations where you don't need Riley's Riley just had a great knack for finding that crease. And then he would lean forward, and it's like, he would kind of get there. So doing that, and then, you've got backs that are built to thrive there. I think Jeremiah Love could be a really good short yardage back. He has no problem just hammering into the line. And then, of course, you've got this cat, number 21, named Keidron Young from Texas, who's 5'11", 235, and a pretty darn good athlete that I would say get him going downhill on 3rd and 1 and make somebody stop him. You know what I mean? So I think it's certainly possible, PQ. It's going to require – it's like anytime you lose a guy that's a great player. It's like it's like what Trev was talking about D-tackle the other day. Notre Dame could end up being better in D-tackle this year than they were last year, but it's not because one guy is better than Riley Mills. It's as a unit, other people improved their game, and they got more players here and a better rotation and all this, that, and the other thing. And that's the same case here. O-line gets better, you're going to be okay. I mean, if it's 3rd and 1 and you got a really good O-line and Jeremiah Love at running back, you're going to be fine in short yardage situations.
Yeah, man. I mean,
you put Keidron Young in there, you're going to be okay.
We were having these same conversations last year at this time. It's like, Notre Dame doesn't have Audric Estime anymore. And how is he going to – I mean, he had 18 rushing touchdowns this last year in South Bend, and they weren't all from 50 yards or beyond. Audric Estime was money in short down situations, and they found a way with Riley Leonard at quarterback. And now this year they're going to find another way to do it. But it's there doesn't have to be – like Notre Dame's team is put together in such a way that there doesn't have to be a – special Wildcat package, Kenny Minchie or CJ Carr package. Like it'll look different. Whoever's the starting quarterback, I don't think on short down and distance or in the red zone is just going to run QB counter, QB power, QB draw. I don't think it'll look like that, but you have players on your team that will all make it work. I mean, shoot, in 2022, in some short down and distance situations, they would do the tush push with Mitchell Evans lined up under center. They find ways to do it. And that's
they went to that a few too many times in 2022, but that's a great point, Trevor. For a long, people didn't figure it out till USC in Game 12 is the first time it really came back to bite them. It's a good point. It's a really good point.
Yeah. So
I'm a little disappointed in myself, and I'm a little disappointed in you, Trevor.
Oh,
in that it took an Ohio State fan to make this comment. Outside of 18 and 19, LSU routinely finished the season ranked lower than they started in the preseason, and I can't believe we didn't go there because he's absolutely correct. Now, Brian Kelly's first year at LSU, they weren't ranked, and they finished in the 16th, so they were higher that year, but that's with a rebuilt roster. But the next year, they were preseason number 5. They finished 12th. Last year, they were preseason number 13 and stayed in the top 25, even with a season opening loss, stayed in the top 25 until November 16th, got as high as number 8 and finished the year unranked. So that is a good point. That is a very good point. They started the 2021 season before Brian Kelly, ranked 16th in the preseason, and spent a whopping 1 week in the rankings, and it was that week 1 because they lost to UCLA and were never ranked again. And then in 2020, they began the season ranked 6th and finished unranked. This is a wild stat. They started that season ranked 6th, Trevor. By week 4, they were out of the top 25.
Wow.
Because they lost to Mississippi State in the opener by 10, beat Vanderbilt, and then lost to Missouri. They dropped out of the top 25 and never got back in. So I can't believe that we did not bring up LSU.
Well, I didn't bring it up because I thought it was a given. So
nice cover, Trev. Nice cover. Well played, man.
Thank you.
Well played. I just assumed everyone knew.
I just, that
LSU was always overrated.
With all the conversations that we've had this offseason about them, I just assumed. So.
Oh boy, that's a well played, Trevor. Very, very
Thank
well
you.
played. Very
Thank
well
you.
played. Oh my goodness. Let's see here. I wanted to get to this one. This got brought up earlier, Trev, and we were talking about this a little bit before the show. Let's talk about this.
Yeah, from Aiden Banami, a two-parter. In a situation like Richard Wesley's, where his family was not on board or agreed on the NIL, et cetera, with Oregon, but their son commits.
Sorry, trying to get to the second one. There we go.
Quite all right. What is the commit process, or what would you do if the player wanted to commit but parents didn't want to yet, et cetera?
This is this is very interesting, Trev. I didn't know what the situation was about this because Notre Dame offered Richard Wesley, but he had no interest in Notre Dame. So I didn't quite know. I saw that he committed, but I didn't see this, like, what happened. So basically what happened was he committed to Oregon during a recent visit, and he was on that visit alone and came back, and there were some comments by his dad that were quite surprising. And I'll just read them. And these are comments that his dad made to Adam Gorney at Rivals. He said it was kind of a shock. We had a plan set in stone, but I guess the overexcitement, this whole process is a lot on a kid. It's a lot on us as adults. We don't have anything set in stone with Oregon as far as the full package. As far as we're concerned, we like Oregon a lot, but there's still some fine tuning that we need to do. Then he says later, ultimately, when I talked to him, he didn't tell me to shut the recruiting down, and he's still very much open and interested in other places. This definitely isn't a final decision based there because there's a lot to be finalized. Now, I get the impression that a lot of people are taking this as, well, the family's just looking for more money. Sure, but I actually took this a little bit differently, and without knowing the specifics, this is an interesting one because you're talking about a young man who reclassified from 27 to 26. So he's younger than most guys in his grade. And the family had a process of how they were going to go through this process, of how they're going to go through his recruitment, much like what Jadon Blair went through last year with his family. And so he goes on this visit, and it sounds like that the visit, and I would assume that the Oregon coaches did a little bit of, playing the game to try to get him to commit. Trev, you said this is the one where Dan Lanning jumped in the pool.
Yeah, it was
after his
pool commitment, I believe,
which is weird. Sounds like Dad wasn't happy that went down, and sounds like Dad's not happy that the son made a decision when they had a process in place. I have no problem with that, and especially when you're talking about, even if he was a typical junior, he's still at best 17. He may only be 16. Who knows? Because he reclassified. I want Dad to say, look, my son ultimately is going to make his own decisions, but there's a reason we had this process, and I'm going to make sure that I'm looking out for my son. And these coaches are paid to persuade teenagers to come play for them. They're good at that, and not all do it nefariously, but like it's all part of sort of the, let's say, manipulation, but it's kind of is. You just hope that you're being honest about it. Sounds like this was not an expected commitment, and Dad is looking out for his kid. I don't take this as an NIL only thing. It's like, well, how can I commit to a school when they haven't even given us their NIL package? Well, that's going to play a role. Look, guys, there's players that have committed to Notre Dame that did the exact same thing. I want to come to you, but you haven't given me a package yet. And at the end of the day, I want to go play for you. But this, like, I'll just say this, one of the top prospects in Notre Dame's 25 class, so current freshman on campus, wanted to go to Notre Dame, but had two things. He wanted to play the process out, and Notre Dame hadn't given them a NIL package yet. The whole thing was, it's not that you have to match. Like, they never told Notre Dame, I don't believe, this is what these schools are offering, and you got to match that. It was just, I need to know what your package is. Because if this school's offering my kid $500,000 and you're offering my kid a gift card to Penn Station, as much as I want him to be there, this is a big gap. As long as you give me something, give my kid something, then this is where he wants to be. Notre Dame eventually offered the NIL package, and the family, there was no negotiation. It was, okay, that's your package. We're ready to go. But you had to offer something. I had to know something. If and I joke and I use these silly examples, but guys, I understand you should go where you want to play. I understand that. But when one school's offering you $10,000 and another school's offering you $500,000, that's a giant difference. if one school's offering me $900,000, but this school's offering me $300,000, then I'm more willing to say I'm going to commit to the school where my kid wants to go to, because $300,000 is still a lot of money, and at a place like Notre Dame that could go a lot further. I know that there's players that have picked Notre Dame despite huge differences in NIL money to other schools, but Notre Dame was still giving a really good package, and it was the whole quote unquote package of Notre Dame: football, Freeman, position coaches, and then the network and all that was still, look, we just need you to give us something. I promise you, Notre Dame did not offer Jeremiah Love the biggest NIL package coming out of high school, and I'm pretty sure that they haven't matched every offer that he's gotten since he's got to Notre Dame. But they're giving him enough where the family's like, this is where we want to be, and this isn't a difference enough money to where we'd have to really think about leaving. So why is it not that for the family? We don't even know what their package is. And I'm kind of getting, and this is me really reading between the lines, I don't think Dad was real happy with how this whole thing went down. You're telling me Oregon didn't know that the family had this kind of plan? And I'll tell you another story. There's a player last year that was being recruited by Notre Dame that wanted to go through the process. There was somebody in the recruiting office that was trying to manipulate this player into trying to push him to make an earlier decision. So he was saying things like, well, if you don't commit, we're going to take this other kid over here. And the coach got wind of it, stepped up and said, ain't going to do that again, because we know their plan. We trust their plan. We trust where our relationship is. We're not going to play that game with this family. And guess what? The recruiting person backed off. It was made very clear by that position coach and the head coach that we trust your plan. And believe me, if you want to be here, you're going to be here. I don't care who else we get. That's not what we're doing here. And that player went through the process, visited all the schools, and guess where he signed in December? Notre Dame. So I think that, to me, like, and it got to the point where, like, if you're going to come push this, then we're just going to pick another school, because you're not going to speed up my kid's process, because this is what we decided we were going to do. And if you don't think he's good enough to wait on him, then that tells us a lot about what you think of us. And that's why that recruiting person was told, shut your pie hole. We're not doing that. We're doing this. And because also it wasn't true. There was no way Marcus Freeman in this particular position coach was going to allow anyone else to get that kid if he wanted to come to Notre Dame. If they had 7 players at this position committed and he wanted to come, they were going to take that kid, believe me. So sometimes you try to play that game, and sometimes parents got to step in and say, you're not going to do this. You're not going to manipulate my child. I'm a grown man. I see what you're trying to do. You're not going to do that to my child. And if this is what I got to do to keep him from making this decision, or then I'm going to do that, then I support that wholeheartedly. If this is just about, well, I don't know what their package is and my son's going to go to the highest bidder, then it's okay. Now, every good thing I said about the dad looking out for his kid, nope. No, you're not doing this the right way. You've got to make a decision for the right reasons, and then the money will take care of itself. But you at least have to have all the data, right? You can tell me, hey, Trev, I can tell you, hey, Trev, I'm going to hire you full time. What are you going to pay me? Don't worry about it. We'll figure it out. I'll take care of you. You quit your job, do all this, and then you're going to come work for me, and then your first paycheck comes, and you're like, Brian, we never agreed to paying in promissory notes of Big Macs and chicken nuggets. So, you know what I mean? Like, and I definitely didn't quit my job to make $50 a month. Like you said, well, yeah, that's me taking care of you. You know, no, I got to have an idea to make a decision like that. If I wouldn't have told you, Trev, how much I was going to pay you, would you have quit your job to come work for me? No, well, unless you wanted to, that whole marriage thing you had coming up in August, if you wanted that to actually stay on plan, you may not have wanted to do that. But you look, I want to come work for you, and I'm not saying you got to offer me the moon, but I got to know something.
Yeah.
To know that I can do what I need to do to take care of my family. If that's what the dad's doing, then hey, man, then let's do it. Let's do it.
Absolutely. So
if that's what's going on here, then good on the dad for looking out for your kid who got kind of caught up in the emotion. So that's what I like.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm with you.
Let's get down to some more questions here. Let me see. Got that one. I am Tenzin. I would just love it if, like, once you actually asked a football question.
I think he does in there at
Yes,
some point.
I know. It's right here. I finally found it. And I'm like, he asks these, but never asks football questions. And I get really annoyed sometimes, like, dude, just ask one football question. And he finally delivered, Trevor, right here.
I am Tenzin. Notre Dame question time. Do you think the way this defense is set up that the linebackers, regardless of position, will have a significant increase in production compared to the last couple?
Oh, boy. Do you think the way that this defense is set up that the LBs, regardless of position, will have a significant increase? I think so. I mean, we've kind of talked about this. I think that they're going to do more things to turn the linebackers loose to run to the ball as opposed to kind of attacking gaps. Like, so here's a perfect example. I was watching the Penn State game, and it was the third down. It was the third and 2 on their first drive of the third quarter. Penn State had, I think it was like 3rd and 2, and they ran stretch to their left. And Drake Bowen had one job. Your job is to attack the B gap and blow the guard up. That was his job. And he blew the guard up, forced a bounce, and then Christian Gray comes down and makes a tackle. That's a run stunt. He's not necessarily running to the ball. He's got a responsibility to attack this gap, blow that guard up, and if the running back comes into your gap, then you make the play. His job was, he was basically a spill player. And they did a lot of that last year in the run game. And that's sometimes why they get gashed. So, like, the big long run against Ohio State, Jack Kaiser was supposed to blitz a gap, and he missed the gap. And that just kind of left it open. I think what you're going to see from this defense is a little bit more letting the D-line kind of eat up those gaps, and the line, at least one linebacker being more free to roam to the football. And that's why the safeties made a lot of tackles, is because they were the ones that were kind of cleaning up all that kind of stuff. And you're going to still have a lot of that. I just think we're going to see a little bit more of the linebackers being used to kind of run free and attack. And your job isn't to blow up the guard. Your job is to follow the guy blowing up the guard into the backfield and make the play in the backfield. So I do think we're going to see more of that.
Yeah. I think you're going to see an increase in production for their disruptive stats. More tackles for loss, more interceptions, like forced fumbles, fumble recoveries. I think that was pretty good last year for them, but I think you're going to see the Notre Dame linebackers, to Brian's point, doing all of those things, being more free to flow to the football, and some potential schematic changes in coverage. I think you're going to see them tally a few more interceptions, tackle for loss. I don't know about sacks, maybe sacks, but tackles for loss and interceptions I think are going to take a bump.
Agree. Good question, I am Tenzin. Very well done. Very well done.
Bobby S. I know it's a running joke, but does Notre Dame now have a training table? Notre Dame now has a training table and multiple chefs, etc., that Brian Kelly wanted. It was silly to say, but also important. Any improvements still needed in nutrition or recovery?
I don't think it's important as people made it out to be. I mean, they were having chefs employed by Notre Dame always making their meals. They were just doing it over at the cafeteria and then putting it in a truck and bringing it over to Notre Dame to the field. But they weren't going to, Papa Vino's and getting to-go orders or catering orders. I mean, they do that at times. Like, it was still being made at Notre Dame. I do think there's something to the convenience aspect of it and being able to prepare food closer by where the players are eating. It's a little fresher and you can do different things. So I do think it's better to have that, but you weren't not winning because the food was being made over in the cafeteria instead of in your football facilities. And that is one of the things that's changing in the new football facilities. My understanding is there is a facility where part of it will be, there will be places where food will be prepared and made there for athletes. The one thing I'm uncertain of, I was told by one person that even though it's a football facility, that the cafeteria part where they eat will be actually used by other sports as well. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but I was told by one person that was going to be true. Because like the rest of it's just football only, but that the eating part was something that might be shared. I'm not sure if that's true. I'd look into that as they get closer to getting that whole thing done. But yeah, that was certainly needed. I still think there's room for improvement from a nutrition standpoint. I still think there's things that Notre Dame can do to up their game in that regard. But they're working on it. It's something that's, taking some time, but they're definitely working on it. And I think part of it is what you saw last year from Loren Lando. Loren Lando is not going to leave a private business where he's just training NFL athletes and making really good money to come to Notre Dame and just keep doing what they were doing and not have any demands.
Yeah.
Like there were certain things that I was told, he said, look, if I'm going to take this job, then I need you guys to do a better job with this and providing that and those type of things. And Notre Dame said, yeah, we'll do that because it's kind of part of what they wanted to do. So, yeah.
Good deal.
It's my thoughts. Trev, you weren't sure. So can I tell the story of what we talked about?
Yeah.
Yesterday?
Yeah.
So Trev asked me, he goes, okay, did Brian Kelly have a personal chef or something? Because there's the BK's personal chef thing, and there's a lot of comments. And so somehow you missed the whole BK chef debacle. So I sent Trevor the article I wrote after Kelly had that interview in which that was one of the things that was discussed. And so you finally got to read that, Trev. So
sure did.
I think, what was your comment? Boy, you sure didn't pull any punches.
Yeah, I think I said, boy, you didn't hold back.
Yeah, no, I did not. Absolutely did not.
Zach Martin, since 2000, who would make up your secondary two deep of Notre Dame players?
Man. Whew. Since 2000. So we're basically like Devontae Duff, Shane Walton, Jerome Sapp, Glenn Earl era, all the way to now. My starting safeties, and people are going to think I'm nuts for this, but I'm sticking to it because I'm going off of how good guys were in college, not what they were in the NFL. But my starting safeties would be Xavier Watts and Harrison Smith.
You're nuts.
I know, but Harrison Smith was a better college player than Kyle Hamilton was for a longer period of time. I didn't expect my employee to call me nuts, but I dig it. You're coming into your own, Trev. Cornerback's a tougher one.
Yeah.
Because, well, I'll tell you one thing. My nickel is someone who didn't play nickel. Say it.
Mine's going to be Julian Love.
At nickel?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. I move him to nickel in the modern defense. My starting cornerbacks are probably Leonard Moore and Benjamin Morrison. I'm torn because, like, I love Cam Hart. Shane Walton was so good in 2002. Troy Pride was really good at Notre Dame. I'm probably going to go Benjamin Morrison and Leonard Moore as my starting corners, and then Cam Hart in my two deep. That's a tough one, man. And then my other corner would probably be Shane Walton. Probably my other corner. Actually, you know what? No, Shane Walton would be my backup nickel. He'd be my number 2 nickel, and him and Julian Love would compete for that spot. So then who's my other corner? Cam Hart and Kavari Russell. I can't believe I forgot Kavari Russell. So my two deep at corner would be Leonard Moore, Cam Hart, and then Benjamin Morrison and Kavari Russell. And then my nickel is Shane Walton and Julian Love battling it out. That would be and then my two deep at safety is Kyle Hamilton's in my two deep at safety. And I was a big Glenn Earl guy. I loved Glenn Earl back in 2002. He's in that conversation. Alohi Gilman's in that conversation for me. I loved Alohi Gilman as a player too, but I'd probably go with Glenn Earl pre-injury. Glenn Earl just had a tough time staying healthy, but he'd be in that. I'd have to go Glenn Earl. I loved Glenn Earl as a player. And I loved Chinadum and I loved Zibikowski, but I just don't think they were as good of players as some of those other guys that I just listed. Zibby probably be my starting punt returner. From 2000 to now. He'd probably be a start punt returner.
In the spirit of putting together something a little different than what you did, my starting lineup is going to go at the boundary. I'll go Leonard Moore. At the field, I'll go Cam Hart. I'll put BMO at the nickel.
Okay.
Starting safeties, I would still go Harrison Smith, Xavier Watts. Backup nickel, I thought about putting Zibby in there and using him how they used Drew Tranquil. Back when he was kind of playing that rover position.
And like in 17? I dig that.
Yep. I've been thinking about that too. And then that's so far my starting lineup. I mean, I would have loved – there's some players that I would have loved to see with like different development. Like what would have Darren Walls have been at Notre Dame if he was coached by like a Mike Mickens? Like
that's
what would
a great point. Great point.
Man, that would have
You
been
know who else
something.
could have been really good if he was coached by Mike Mickens? Gary Gray.
Yep.
But Darren
Yep.
Walls is a great one. Great one.
Yeah, Darren Walls would have been something for me. I mean, Notre Dame a little bit last year ran a couple of like 3 safety sets against like Ohio State. Like I would have put Kyle Hamilton just in the middle of the field, let him roam.
What about Kyle Hamilton as sort of like a nickel rover type with Harrison Smith and Xavier Watts in the starting lineup? But you know who might also have been a really good rover in this is Zeke Mata.
Oh yeah.
Zeke Mata might be a will in this defense.
I was about to say, yeah. Him and Kyle McCarthy might have been wills in this defense. Yeah.
You know who might have been in my 2 deep? If he would have been able to stay healthy. I've said this a lot. I think that Dan McCarthy, if he didn't get injured, because you brought up his brother, if Dan McCarthy doesn't get injured, I swear he would have been an absolute stud at Notre Dame. I loved his high school film. He was so good at Cardinal Mooney, like at 6'2", athletic, just couldn't stay healthy. He was really talented. He's an NFL player, in my opinion, if he doesn't just battle all the injuries he had. Yeah.
Yep. That's a fun question, Zach. That's fun.
Those are, I mean, especially during the summer, those are great questions to have, like during the summer. Like when we got asked last year, it was like, what's your starting offensive line? And I went through it and I freaking forgot about Joe Walt. And I was like, oh my gosh, like how did I forget Joe Walt? So you had Kyle Hamilton in your 2 deep, right? At safety?
Yes.
Who was your starting safeties again? It was
the same as you, Harrison Smith and Xavier Watts. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. It's close. It's close. I mean, it's a scenario when we're talking about safeties that have came through Notre Dame the last 25 seasons, like there's not really a whole lot of wrong answers that you can put together. Somebody wants Kyle Hamilton in theirs. I totally understand.
I'm not pounding the table telling you you're nuts for having Kyle Hamilton in there. I just think sometimes Kyle Hamilton's legend is a little greater than his actual results because he really only had 1 full season of greatness. That was during the COVID year because the next year he only played half a year. So we only got to see one year of Kyle Hamilton healthy for an entire season.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think
that 1 year was pretty freaking good.
Oh gosh, yeah,
it was pretty good.
Well, I think some people also just forget how dominant Harrison Smith was.
Yes,
like truly.
Yeah,
I mean that guy was a dog.
Yeah, and I think some older fans still, when they think Harrison Smith, they still think of him in his outside linebacker days.
Mm-hmm.
But his last 2 years in 10 and 11 as a safety were outstanding.
Yeah.
This is a really good, I like these are great. This is a great offseason question as well from Irish Dragon 23.
What does Kenny or CJ need to do in order to dethrone Brady Quinn or Jimmy Clausen as your favorite Irish quarterback?
Well, I'll say this. I mean, I don't know that there's anything they can do to dethrone Brady Quinn short of a national championship because, like, I mean, Brady was the quarterback at a time when I was still younger. I wasn't married. Like, Notre Dame football was a big part of kind of what, outside of my job as a coach, was what kind of fueled my interests and thoughts and things like that. But it really comes down to win. I mean, that win a championship. Because you didn't mention my favorite quarterback. My favorite quarterback was not Brady Quinn. Brady Quinn is kind of my like grown, but my favorite quarterback is Tony Rice. Why? Because he won. It's a great story, but like, dude won. I mean, and like he's the one that actually was the quarterback of when I became a Notre Dame fan. I mean, think about my first 2 years of being old enough to remember Notre Dame, Trevor, were in 88 and 89.
Oh,
so I got to watch them go 24-1. You know what I mean? And
I get it.
And somebody said well played, Guns N' Roses. Very well played. Ant BR Steve Angeli. You guys are on one today, Ant. You're on one today. He's trying to get me. But it's Tony Rice. Why? Because he won. Brady Quinn is more of like the modern. So when I always go with Brady, it's because it's in questions related to a modern team. I can't put Tony Rice from the offense he ran in 88 into a modern offense. But he's actually my favorite one. But it's win. Part of Brady's greatness is he took over at a time when Notre Dame was kind of had reached a low. And Brady comes in and just turns it around and just has some very memorable performances. And can you get him more, unless his name was like O'Quinn? I don't know how his name was like Seamus O'Quinn is about the only way he might have been more Irish. He went to Dublin Kaufman. His high school's team's nickname, I believe, is the Fighting Irish. Like, you can't have a more Notre Dame guy than that, except for like I said, his name was like Seamus O'Quinn or something like that. and he went to Dublin Kaufman in Dublin, Ireland. And so all of that factored into it, but it's win it all. I mean, that's really what it'll be. I fully expect CJ Carr to surpass Jimmy Clausen by his second year as a starter. Because I think there's a lot of similarities between CJ and Jimmy as players. A lot of similarities. And CJ is going to play on better teams. So I fully expect Jimmy to be surpassed by the time his career is over. You want to surpass Brady, though, it's about winning. And winning a lot. I don't know if I'd have to say winning at all, but you got to get me to the championship game once to surpass Brady Quinn. Because with all due respect to CJ Carr, you don't have a super Irish name. You know what I mean? And but no, I think when it's all said and done, one of those two guys will have a chance to be there. But I think Kenny will win more than Jimmy did if he starts. But I don't know that he has the throwing ability that Jimmy had. CJ, I think, does.
What? Oh, man, Guns N' Roses was beat me by just a second. Like, Brady Quinn, when I think of him, first of all, Brady Quinn to me is what Tony Rice was to you. Like, in the first 2 years for you growing up watching 88, 89, that like 05, 06 for me, man. And I just remember like number 10, like when I was growing up, I thought that all quarterbacks should just be number 10. Cause like, that's what I grew up watching, but for him, he's kind of like that gold standard of intangibles that you want to see your quarterback have physically, emotionally, mentally. Like you want your quarterback to be bought into everything that's going on. You don't want and I'm just using this as an example, not trying to stir the pot here, but like, you don't want that Shedeur Sanders type of quarterback where it's like, I don't really care what our overall record is. Like, I balled out today type of guy. Brady Quinn was very much, look, I could have went out and thrown for 350 yards and 4 touchdowns. And if we lost, I didn't do enough. That was Brady Quinn. Like it was in the 06 UCLA game. I think Pat Hayden was talking about like what Darius Walker said in an interview before the final drive. It's like, hey, like, you look in Quinn's eyes, everything's going to be okay. Like, he just has that command of the huddle. That's what I think a CJ or Kenny would have to do. Like, be that guy. And based on the things that we've said this offseason, I don't think that either of them will be asked to do that. What Brady Quinn was asked to do in his final year of eligibility at Notre Dame as a senior. But at some point in their career, just be that guy where it's like, hey, we're good, guys. We have CJ. Hey, we're good, guys. We got Kenny. And that's how that 06 team felt. It's like, like, we're in every game because we have Brady Quinn. And a elite supporting cast of other players.
Right.
But
like, he wasn't thrown to bums.
Yeah.
I mean, but they had those same guys the year before when they were a very mediocre, bad football team. I mean, they had Samardzija the year before, and they had Stovall, and they had Raymond McKnight and Darius Walker, and they were terrible. Yeah, exactly.
So that's what one of those guys would have to do to dethrone Quinn. Clausen, it's a little bit different of a conversation because I think he gets some of the love that he gets, or the lack of, I should say, is the testament to just how bad the teams were that he was on, unfortunately for him. And
he was considered a bust, didn't do anything in the NFL. I'm like, Jimmy Clausen was far from a bust. If you put Jimmy Clausen on a good football team with good coaching, that dude is a Notre Dame legend, in my opinion.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yep. Absolutely. But unfortunately for Clausen, like, a lot of the narratives are like what could have been.
Right.
Because
and that's fair, but that's not on Jimmy.
No.
That's on, I mean, it's like they lost games. He'd throw for 430 yards and they'd lose because the defense, just is terrible. It's just a poorly coached football team. And it was bad luck. Just, I mean, honestly, it's like Ron Paulus. Somebody in the chat was saying this. Who was it? Let me find the comment. Cause it's, like, I've talked about this, but who was it? Was it Christopher Galloway? Said Ron Paulus had the wrong offense for a style of quarterback. I say this, and it's one of those ones like, hey, I'll take this to my grave. But Ron Paulus has a very different career, and he never was going to live up to the 2 Heisman hype ever. That was so unfair. But I think he would have been a very good college quarterback if he wouldn't have gone to Notre Dame, or if Lou Holtz would have done what the reports were that he said he was going to do to get Ron Paulus, which is change the offense. And like if Randy Moss comes in there, and I still think the biggest. I've been asked this question before. I don't know if I've ever said it like this, but you think about the biggest moment in Notre Dame history in the last 30 years. Gosh, it's been now 31 now, is the moment that Notre Dame rescinded Randy Moss's admittance into the school. Because I think we would have seen Lou Holtz change the offense if he had Ron Paulus and Randy Moss. And Ron Paulus would have, I think Randy Moss's first year would have been Ron Paulus's second year, I think. And when I went back and looked, May was 90, like 9, because it had been second year starter, 95. They would have had Derek Mays and Randy Moss at receiver. We'd have to think Lou Holtz is a bad football coach if he wasn't going to change his offense with Ron Paulus and those two guys at wide receiver. I just don't see how he would have done it. And Ron Paulus's career would look very different. Very different. Even with the first collarbone injury. I mean, but it just, had he come at a different time, his career would look a lot different.
Yeah.
So, and Jimmy went through that as well, in my opinion, where he just came to Notre Dame at the wrong time.
Yeah. Super chat from ND Milton fan. Thank you for the super chat. What are the top 3 assistant position coaches and top 3 players that brought the most benefit to the Notre Dame program in the last 20 years?
Boy, that's a top 3 assistants and top 3 players last 20 years. I mean, we're Brady Quinn, to your comment, Manti Te'o brought the most, Riley Leonard.
I love that.
Yeah. Brady, because as you mentioned, Brady was kind of part of that revitalization of the program. And then Manti just to me changed so many things, was the most decorated linebacker. And there's just so many good, everybody remembers the thing at the end, but Manti did so much good. I think Manti played a huge role, because you talk about, like, it wasn't just the 2012 season. Manti being at Notre Dame is a big reason why you're seeing them getting Kingston Viliama-Asa, Ed Madden-Faremo, and Alohi Gilman, and a lot of those Hawaiian and Polynesian players, because he started that pipeline to Notre Dame of those type, Maris Leofau, those type of players. He started that. So his impact has gone way beyond just the greatness of his individual career. He is a big reason why Myron Tungavaloa, Amosa, and guys like that, and Tiki Hola and a lot of those type of guys are at Notre Dame, and why they feel comfortable coming to Notre Dame. So Manti had a humongous impact on the Notre Dame football team. And I think Manti is also the modern example of, if you come to Notre Dame and be great, you will be famous. You will be well known. Manti would have cleaned up in NIL back in 2020.
Oh,
he would have cleaned up in 2020. There's no, or 2012, I mean, no doubt. But and then Riley Leonard, because I think Riley was the missing ingredient to Notre Dame going from a team that was good to a team that can make a run at a title. And that's what Marcus Freeman needed last season to take Notre Dame into that different stratosphere as a program. So I'm going to go with those 3. Because I look at it beyond just benefit of on the field. Because if you're going to talk about 3 best players, I mean, you got to have Quentin Nelson in your conversation of 3 best players. But that's my answer.
I love the Riley Leonard pick. I think you and I talked about this in the post-game show from the national championship. We're going to look down the road in 2 to 3 years, maybe 3 to 5. And we're going to look back at 2024 and say, thank goodness Riley Leonard came to South Bend. Like, he could be the Taj Boyd for Clemson that helped propel that program forward, honestly. My top 3, I would go, I don't know where he would fit, because I agree with all the players you put in there, but Zach Martin's got to be one of those guys for me. So I think he completely changed the trajectory of being an offensive lineman at Notre Dame.
Yeah, he was the OG of that, right? But that's why one of my 3 assistant coaches is Harry Heastan.
Yeah.
Zach Martin is not Zach Martin if Harry Heastan doesn't coach him.
That's true. No, that's fair. Absolutely. Yeah. No, those those players are all in line for me. And I think if you ask me this question again in like next season or 2 off seasons from now, I think I'd probably look to put BMO on that list or like a Cam Hart on that list or something that changed around Notre Dame secondary.
That's why Mike Mickens is one of my 3 coaches on this list.
Yeah, who are your 3 coaches? Harry
Heatstan, Mike Mickens, and Mike Elko are my 3. The reason I say Mike Elko, because Mike Elko also had an impact beyond just that one season. Because Mike Elko brought with him Clark Lee. Mike Elko took over at a time when Notre Dame was coming off their worst 3-season stretch of defense in history. And I know that's true because Lou Samoji told that to me, and that's one person. When they tell me a fact about Notre Dame, I don't need to look it up for myself. I don't need to trust but verify with stuff Lou told me. But I think it was like the worst rush defense in 3 years. And the program wasn't like all the good vibes that they had built up with 2012 and 2015 were gone after 2016. They were a joke of a program. Mike Elko comes in, and he made 2 decisions when he came in that, to me, sent this program on a completely different direction. Number one is obviously himself, but then bringing in Clark Lee to be your D coordinator, which meant you got the Mike Elko impact beyond just the one season he was here. But another decision he made after getting hired, there was this safety linebacker, athlete type of kid from Tidewater. I think he went to Bethel High School. Let me just look this up real quick because I want to make sure I can't believe I'm forgetting this one here. Give me 1 second. One second here. Let me look this up. Yes, I was correct. Bethel High School in Hampton, Virginia. Cat was down to Virginia and Michigan State. They had recruited him to Wake Forest. They flipped him, or they got him late in the process. Nobody was talking about him. Jeremiah Wusu-Koromoa. Getting him, to me, was a huge impact also, because I think it was one of those things that helped. That I don't know that Notre Dame could have been as good as they were in 19 and especially in 20 on defense without him at linebacker. But you get the Elko hire. He brings in Clark Lee. That then led to Marcus Freeman having a desire to also then come here and say, hey, let's build on this tradition of defense. And then that led to Marcus Freeman being hired as head coach. So I could go with Marcus Freeman, but I think his impact is more as a head coach. But I think Mike Elko changing the direction of this program, because if they don't turn things around in 2017, Brian Kelly's gone. Then would we have had the things that led us to the Marcus Freeman era? So I think Mike Elko coming in and being able to completely change the direction of the program defensively, and then obviously bringing in Clark Lee with him, who was with him at Wake Forest, I think is what helped Notre Dame recover and get them back on track as a program. So those are the 3 assistants for me. Brian Kelly never does what he does at Notre Dame if he doesn't hire Harry Heastan in 2012. Never happens. Never happens. So those are my 3. And I don't know that Marcus Freeman has the success that he has now if he doesn't have Mike Mickens as his DB coach. And then who hired him? Brian Kelly gets credit for hiring him because he hired him before Freeman got here. But those, to me, are the 3 assistant coaches that have had the greatest impact at Notre Dame in the last 20 years. Because there's no assistants from the Charlie Weiss era. That's the 20 years basically starts in 05. And you can maybe go with Bob Diaco. You could have gone with him, but I think the Bob Diaco era didn't last as long because of what Brian Kelly. Like Brian Kelly's the reason that I can't put Bob Diaco in here, because it was able to be undermined that quickly.
Yeah, one of mine was Bob Diaco. And then the 2 other ones were Harry Heatstand and Mike Mickens for me. But up until when Bob Diaco was hired, like Notre Dame was not known as a defensive school outside of like 88 and like 93.
Yeah, they used to be that. Like when Notre Dame was great all those years, they were like in 1966, Trev, I'm going to give you this stat. You're going to love this stat. In 1966, when Notre Dame won the national championship under Ara Persegyan, let me find this here real quick. That Notre Dame football team gave up that entire season 38 points. That entire season. So, like, Notre Dame was known as a great team. That year, they gave up 14 points in the opener to Purdue. Purdue was number 7. They gave up 7 against Northwestern, then had 3 straight shutouts, including a win at number 10 Oklahoma. Gave up 7 points to Navy, then had 2 more shutouts. Tied number 2 Michigan State 10-10, and then beat number 10 USC on the road 51-0. Like, for a long time, Notre Dame was a defensive team. It wasn't until like Davy's issue was he couldn't recruit well enough to have the athletes that they had back in the day. Ty just couldn't coach, and then Charlie just was a train wreck from putting good defensive coaches and teams on the field. But yeah, for a long time they were known as a great defensive team.
Yeah, and that's some of the reason why I had Bob Diaco on that list, because he was a little bit of that resurgence of like, hey, Notre Dame is a program that needs to have a stout defense. Notre Dame doesn't go in there running 2012 if it's not for that defense. Like, I like Tyler Eifert and Zach Martin and Chris Watt were on that team. I like their stable of running backs, but like, there were some games where they defensively single-handedly won them that game. Like the game against Michigan, who ended up not being a great team that year, that was not like an offensive output from that offense, and defensively they cleaned up, and I think that even more so highlighted how bad Van Gorder was in 14 and 15 because Diaco was so good in his short stretch. Because in 14 and 15, Notre Dame's defense kind of just looked like what it did from like 05 to 09. Mm-hmm. Like it was just, they were helped out by really good offenses like they were in 05, 06, and 09, but the defense just couldn't stop anybody if they paid the other team to stop. And so that's – but –
we tried to throw it. You guys kept screwing up. Couldn't make it that obvious.
Yeah. But outside of that, I would go Diaco, Mickens, and Heaton. But I love everything that you said about Elko and like then what happened afterwards.
Right.
Couldn't agree more.
Because the Elko impact lasted longer than his tenure here.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
That's the way I look at it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I'm going to read this one, Trev, because I'm going to get your thoughts on this. Swan Dong with Super Chat. Thank you. With all the great O-line players we've had, who would you guys say the best offensive line player has been for Notre Dame, say from 2000 and then also all time? Who and why?
Gosh. The best of, I guess I'll go with a guy that I brought up in the previous segment. It's Zach Martin. For one, his performance with Notre Dame in 2012 and 2013 especially. And then what he did kind of just continued to pass the torch down, and Notre Dame became his O-line U. Like, O-line U doesn't happen if it's not for one Harry Heaton and two, like Zach Martin, Chris Watt, guys like that. And then you go and you talk about what Zach Martin did in his professional career. Like, the standard that Notre Dame has had along the offensive line really since 2012 until now has been because of his impact. So I would probably say him. He wasn't the biggest. He wasn't the flashiest. On the field best, it's probably Quentin Nelson. But you could make the argument maybe a guy like Quentin Nelson doesn't come here if Zach Martin doesn't lay the foundation of like, hey, this is what Notre Dame's going to be known for. We're going to be stout in the trenches. I'm going to be a big part of that. I'm going to make sure that I'm a part of that. So on the field, it's probably Quentin. He's the most dominant offensive guard I've ever seen at Notre Dame. One of the most dominant, but as far as like overall lasting impact, I would say Zach Martin. And then all time, just full disclosure, like my knowledge just doesn't go back that far. Like I've seen people in the chat throw out like Aaron Taylor. I'm sure he was great, but I didn't watch his game enough to be like, that is the greatest Notre Dame offensive lineman of all time. Cause like, I didn't watch him like I watched Zach Martin or Joe Alt or Quentin Nelson or,
I like how because Zach Martin was a great player at Notre Dame, but he wasn't as good at Notre Dame as he was in the NFL.
Mm-mm.
He was great, but he very underrated. Should have been an All-American his last year, but the way I read the question, it's best player. And the best player is Quentin Nelson. And it's not close since 2000. If you're going to say all time, I always say this, Trev. I'm like, I can't say all time on people I don't know. And if you look at Notre Dame, let me pull this up here real quick and go to the draft history. But like, I believe one year they had an offensive lineman that I believe was taken like with the number 2 overall pick back in the 60s, I believe. Let me go find it. I believe there was a guy taking number 2. George Kuntz was taking number 2 overall, but that's not who I was thinking of. But I think he was an offensive tackle. But where was that guy? I thought it was the 60s. Maybe it was a little sooner, but yeah, they've had some offensive linemen that were taken like really high in the draft and were great college. I never saw them play. You know, so I couldn't tell you if I was going to say who's the greatest all-time tight end. Well, where's Ken McAfee on your list? He's not, because I never saw him play. You know, so like those type of things you look at, and it's like I have to have seen a guy play, and I didn't see some of those guys play, so I never saw Leon Hart play. And so that's just kind of how I look at it. So it is not a debate between anybody other than Quentin Nelson and Aaron Taylor. Like, there's nobody else in the conversation for me other than those two. And I don't know if I was old enough during the Aaron Taylor era. I was 15 in Aaron Taylor's last year, to be able to truly compare him to Quentin Nelson the way that I can, who when I watched Quentin Taylor play, I had played college football and coached college football and all those type of things. So I had a different frame of reference than I did when I watched Aaron Taylor. That's kind of where I'm at on that. So it's hard for me to say that, you know, that I can even give an honest opinion between the two. Because I just think when you watch someone as a teenager, I'd like to think your ability evaluates better when you get in your 40s.
Mm-hmm.
So I would just like to think so. But that's kind of where I'm at. It would be one of those two.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of those two. Yeah. Let's see here. Got that one?
Super chat from Tyler Evans. Thank you, Tyler. Outside of Notre Dame games this year, give me your top 3 games that you believe will define the 2025 season.
Well, I think one of them's happening in week 1. I think the LSU Clemson game is huge. I think that's a massive, massive game. I think that is going to tell us a lot about both of those teams. I think that's going to have a big say in several things. It's not only those two teams having an opportunity to go out and you know, one of those teams could have your week 1, you're in, if you don't win now mode, like if you don't win out mode, you could be in trouble type of thing. But it's also because it's an out of conference rivalry. The ACC doesn't get a lot of respect. If Clemson can kind of come out and beat LSU, it not only says something about Clemson, but maybe it's something that gives the ACC a little bit of a boost. I think that's certainly one of those games that you look at and say that's in my conversation for big games this year. I think another one is going to be Oregon at Penn State. I think it's going to be a huge game nationally. It's going to be a huge game for both of those teams. We're going to find out if Penn State's for real or not, because if you can't beat Oregon home, I don't know that you're going to be able to beat Ohio State on the road, you know, and all of a sudden Penn State's not even – are they a playoff team at that point in time with 2 losses and having – because what would be Penn State's big win if they can't beat Oregon or Ohio State? Like, what's their big win? I don't know what that could be. You know, like, I don't know what that could be. So that's another one. So I think also, Trevor, I think that September 27th, Georgia plays at Alabama or hosts Alabama. This could be a monumental game.
Yeah.
Because if Georgia wins in a close game, they're both really good, normal. If Bama goes on the road into Athens and beats Georgia, could that be the thing that finally truly turns the tide, no pun intended, I guess maybe a little pun intended, on Georgia being the supreme team in the SEC?
Yeah.
That would be a massive one. And I could go with Ohio State and Texas, but I think that game's bigger for Texas than is Ohio State. If Ohio State loses that game, it's almost kind of like, yeah, look at all they lost. Wait till they get to November. I think if Texas loses that game, it hurts them a lot more than it would hurt Ohio State to lose that game, even with it being in Columbus. What are your thoughts on some of those games, Trev?
I have Texas and Ohio State in mind. I would have those thoughts if Ohio State was playing on the road. They lost a lot. They have an inexperienced quarterback. It's week 1. But since they're playing at home, man, they have home field, because home field advantage is a very real thing. And I think based on how these teams are being talked about in Texas and Ohio State, I think with how they're being talked about in the preseason, like, yes, Ohio State lost a lot, but there's not a lot of teams that can lose everything that they had and return arguably the 2 best players in college football in Caleb Downs and Jeremiah Smith. That's going to play a factor for me, because there are a lot of assumptions being made about Ohio State. It's like, yes, they lost a lot, but Jermaine Matthews played a lot and Arvell Reese played a lot, and they returned the interior of their offensive line, and they still got the receiving core, and Julian Sain is, slated to be the next really good Ohio State quarterback. And honestly, because of the string that they've put together, I don't really have a whole lot of arguments about somebody just saying like, hey, this is Ohio State's next guy. It's like that. Yeah, probably. I had questions about Will Howard and his ability to perform in big games, and then he got a national championship ring. I'm not saying it was all because of Will Howard, but, you hear a lot about that with Ohio State quarterbacks. So that one, if it was on the road, I'd be like, okay, it's on the road, another hostile environment. You're going down to SEC territory. But since Ohio State's at home, that one to me is going to be.
I get that. If Ohio State wins, that's huge for Ohio State. My point was, I don't think it hurts them if they lose. It is because of all that they lost, and if they run the table, they'll still have some good wins, and they'll have beaten this team and that team, and that's kind of where I'm coming from on that, Trev. They'll still have beaten Penn. Like, if Ohio State loses that game, they got to play at Washington, at Illinois. They get Penn State at home. They got to play at Michigan. They'll have plenty of chances to kind of overcome that. I also be willing to bet you a steak dinner that most national analysts pick Texas to win that game at Ohio State. So I think that factors into it as well. But you make good points. And I want to point out something too, because Ben Tarnowski said that Penn State didn't have one last year either. And fair, but here's the difference. Penn State played in the Big Ten title game last year.
Sure.
And Penn State didn't have 2 regular season losses last year. If they do, I think that's a different story, because they kept hyping up the Illinois win last year. Illinois was ranked in the top 25, but they only had the 1 loss. So you could still kind of go with your preseason expectations. If they lose both of those games, especially with one of them being at home, I don't think that it's going to be the same story as it was last year, because their second loss last year came in the conference championship game. Mm-hmm. So I look at their team, their schedule in 2025, and if they lose at home to Oregon and they lose at Ohio State, they better hope Indiana and Nebraska are really good. Like, they're going to be in trouble. Could they still make the playoff? Of course they could still make the playoff, just the same reason Notre Dame could still make the playoff. But they better hope those 2 teams I mentioned in November are ranked. And I think Indiana will. Nebraska will see.
Yeah.
But you're highly unlikely to be at home in that situation either. Because, like, Ohio State had 2 losses, but they also had a win at Penn State. And that helped them kind of – if their best win was not that win at Penn State, like, if they'd have lost to Penn State and then beat Michigan at home, I don't think they host. I think they're still in, but I don't think they host. I think they're traveling somewhere in round 1. I don't think Ohio State is the number 8 seed if they'd have lost at Penn State and beat Michigan at home. And then you played the 2 good teams you played, they both beat you.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's right. Because, again, I don't think the committee looks at a second loss in the conference title game the same as a regular season loss.
No, for sure.
Especially at home, especially if it's at home. So, yeah, that would be one for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Good question. We're going to get to a couple more of these. We got to kind of wrap it up. I can't, but we're 3.5 hours in. I didn't realize we were that far in. That says a lot about how great your guys' questions are. There's so many great questions so far today. I want to get to a couple more of some. There's a couple that I don't know they're going to be able to address because they're going to require a little bit more detailed answers. So we got that one from him.
Tyler did put in one more super chat after
he
this
did.
One, I believe.
All right, let's get to it.
Tyler Evans, give me your top 5 rivalries in college football.
This is kind of off the top of my head. I reserve the right to change if I think of something, but off the top of my head, my top 5 rivalries, obviously Notre Dame and USC is there. Notre Dame Navy, Notre Dame Pitt. No, I'm kidding. Notre Dame USC. Okay. All right, being a little bit of a homer today, Brian.
Like,
no,
okay.
Notre Dame USC is in there. Best transcontinental rivalry in all of football. You've got Ohio State and Michigan. Might be the greatest rivalry in college football. I mean, it might be. And I think the Iron Bowl is a great rivalry. Texas-Oklahoma is a great rivalry. I think that's top 5. My next one is a little bit tougher, but I'm a child of the 80s and of the 90s as far as like growing up. The Florida State rivalry was phenomenal then. And I look at rivalries as ones that are still active. It's like I loved the Colorado-Nebraska one growing up, but it's not there anymore. I loved the Miami-Notre Dame rivalry, and if they would have kept playing, that might be in there as a top 5, but it isn't. I'd probably go with the Florida State game is probably my next one. So it'd be Notre Dame, USC, Ohio State, Michigan, the Iron Bowl, Alabama, Auburn. I'd go Oklahoma, Texas, and the Red River Shootout. Oh, man. There's no great Pac-10 rivalries. I don't think USC, UCLA is like a great rivalry that, transcends the sport. I don't. Go ahead, Trev. Can you think of another one?
My last one's Army-Navy.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. But, for me, the Army-Navy game is more of just why I wouldn't have it in there is that's more of what those players represent than necessarily like a bunch of great games.
Fair.
Between the two. But as far as what it represents, yeah, that's a good one. That's a really good one.
Yeah.
Really good one.
Because I was on the same track as you were, and I was like, well, Notre Dame and USC really in the last couple, I don't know about great games, mostly because.
But it's still a great rivalry, though. It's
yeah.
Ohio State beat Michigan 14 out of 15 years. It's still a great rivalry.
Oh, yeah.
Wayne Miller said, I live in Florida. Florida, Georgia is a big one. That's a big rivalry. I just don't think that's a great rivalry. Like, I don't think that has the same national flavor of what Florida State does when they're both good. I don't. It's a good rivalry, but it's just never been one that got me fired up. Bedlam's Archer just said Oklahoma State. That's a fun one. Yes, I like that rivalry, but it's not top 5, but that's one that I like.
I think Alabama LSU is one. I like that rivalry.
Yeah, that's a more modern one. I don't know that Alabama would consider that necessarily a rivalry as much as like they're with Tennessee. But that's been one that's certainly been impactful in the last 15 years. They played for each other for a title in 2011, but BYU, Utah.
The Holy War.
Yeah, it's never been one that kind of got me fired up. It's got a great name, and I love the contrasting colors of their uniforms, like the bright red with like the bright blue. But it's never been one that got me super fired up. I used to like Oregon State a little. I mean, that's always been a good one, but it's not like top 5. Michigan State's one that's got a little bit of spunk to it also. That's got some nastiness to it, but again, not top 5, but just some other good ones I'm thinking of. Clemson, South Carolina has been one of those ones that I've never really cared much about until recently. Just never been a rivalry that I really mattered much to me. So that's not one that I've really cared much about over the years. Yeah, it's sad as a lot of the great rivalries, like just they're not a thing anymore. You just don't see them because of the Nebraska leaving the Big 12, and like Oklahoma Nebraska used to be a great game. So yeah, those are mine. I like those 5. Yeah, it's good stuff. Good ones. Very good ones. Let's see here. Here's I think a quick one.
Do you think college football conference realignment will eventually result in a super league?
Not in the way that we've identified super leagues in recent years, meaning like 2 to 3 big 20-plus team leagues. I think we're going to see a super league, but it's going to look more like a break off of the group of 5 and the Power 5.
Yeah.
And once that happens, then that'll be quote unquote a super league, but I don't think it's going to be like the 20 team leagues that people are talking about. I'm hopeful. What I hope happens is, look, the way it's going now, the group of 5 can't compete with the Power 5. It needs to kind of do your own thing. Now play each other and all that, but in certain ways it's almost like you got to have Power 5, group of 5, FCS, D2, D3, and then NAIA. I think it's kind of how it's going to have to be. Where group of 5 is just they're not competing for championships with the Power 5 anymore. And like what I think will happen if that does go that direction, I do think there's a couple current group of 5s that get brought over. I think Boise gets brought over. I can see Fresno getting brought over. I think some of those teams are going to join the Pac-12 and then be considered part of the Power 5 type of thing. But I think what my perfect world scenario for me is the group of 5 gets kind of broken off. The Power 5 takes on some of those teams, the Boise's, the teams like that. Because remember, not that long ago, TCU was a group of 5. Utah was a group of 5. BYU was a group of 5. UCF was a group of 5. Like, those teams were not Power 5s as we know them today. But you get some sort of NFL-style TV distribution amongst all the teams that's here. And then what that causes the leagues to do is to say, hey, we no longer have the need to build the way we were to monopolize the TV revenue. We can't do that anymore. So now it is no longer advantageous for us to have a 20-team Big Ten that has teams from Florida and California, because it's not going to change our split of the TV money anyway. So how we can benefit is we're still going to get ours in the TV money, but we're going to save hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in travel by not sending our soccer team and our baseball team and our softball team to California and Oregon and Washington and Florida because we were trying to poach, one of those southern schools. And we see a realignment back to what it was before. Big 12, Pac-12, maybe the Big East becomes a thing, and Miami and those schools go back. The ACC doesn't need to be as big. I could see something like that happening, and I actually hope that happens. I don't know how likely it is, but that's my wish for how this all goes down when it all gets sorted out and we get back to having the regional rivalries and the regional things. And then if you want more at-large bids, then you give them one to each of those. So it'd be the Big East, the Big Ten, the ACC, the SEC, the Big 12, and the Pac-12. So you have the 6 kind of big leagues, and you got a 16-team playoff. Those 6 winners of those leagues all get automatic bids. The rest are at-larges. If I was king of college football, that's what I would do.
Yeah, me and a buddy sat down and we talked about this like after all these teams started going to different conferences. And what I think should happen is I think that college football within the NCAA should become its own entity. I don't think that it's fair that, Stanford's basketball team, men's, women's basketball team, baseball, softball, that is asked to go over to the ACC and play all these games. I think that there needs to be like a top, like in terms of conference realignment, like a top like 64 teams in like the FBS of college football, because there's some group of 5 teams that are significantly better than low level, like power 4 teams. Like Purdue last year was a power 4 team. I think, yeah. And I think that like professional, like I think it's soccer that does this, but you can like bid up and like go into like bigger leagues and stuff like that. Like I think college football should be able
relegation thing or whatever.
It's something, yeah. I don't know too much about
Ted Lasso.
I don't know too much about that because of soccer, or I don't watch soccer like that. But like I think that'd be cool. Like just 64 teams, you split up into 8 different conferences, and like you would have to bring back some of the more traditional ones, like the Big East would have to come back, things like that. Like Pac-12, I guess you'd call it the Pac-8, would have to be a little bit more what it is. But like I think that's what it should be. honestly, because that gives better group of 5 teams opportunity to move up. And like, look, you're not going to waste a spot at the, the Power 8 level, call it, if you're not that good. Like, you have to maintain a level of performance year in and year out. And that's what I would do. But then you leave the other sports out of it. Notre Dame is a prime example. Their hockey teams in the Big Ten, their basketball teams are in the ACC, football's independent, so that ideally, the phrase that you use, if I was the king of college football and I could just, whatever I say went, that's what I would do, is start off by making football its separate entity. That's what I would do.
And then, so the issue is you're still going to run into the same problem that you had before, where there's going to be an unequal distribution of TV revenue, which I still think creates some of those same issues that are hurting football. But I do think it helps save money with those other sports. And that would be, if you're not going to go the path that I'm going to go, I think there needs to be some sort of, for football, it's different. I mean, we have that in sports. Mm-hmm. No, there is no ACC in hockey. So Notre Dame is an independent football. They're an ACC team in a lot of other sports, and then they're in the Big Ten in hockey. Notre Dame is part of 2 different Power 4 leagues in different sports, and then they're independent football. Mm-hmm. So then why can't we do this? So it makes a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. Makes a lot of sense. All right. We had a super chat pop up, a couple super chats. DK said, Trevor mentioned hockey. There you go. And then we got one from John Klimek.
You get to change 3 things about next year's schedule. You can remove a team, add a team, and change when we play a team.
I overall, I kind of like the schedule the way that it is. The only thing that I would do, and if I could have the schedule my way, I would take probably Purdue, slide them into week 1, and then move everything back a week. And go about it that way. I personally like warm-up games. I think it's needed. I think, if you got a big game in week 1, you can focus your attention on that. And I like the fact that they have a bye week after to help kind of get over some of the emotion that leads into the trap games that kind of come after those big openers like we saw with Ohio State. I mean, think about it. Notre Dame in the 2 years that they played a ranked team on the road in week 1, lost both games at home the next week. Lost to Marshall after losing Ohio State, and then lost to Northern Illinois last year against after beating Texas A&M. So I would say that would probably be one. But overall, honestly, Trevor, I like this year's schedule. I do. I don't know that I would like to add a team. I mean, I don't know that there's anybody that I'm like, I'm dead set on you got to play this team or that team. I'd like Clemson on the schedule this year. I'd like to have both Notre Dame and Clemson being really good, and I'd say I'd want that to replace. Let me look at the schedule because I'd like it kind of later in the year. Let me look at Notre Dame's schedule real quick. If I could completely change the schedule, I'd move Navy back to Senior Day. I'd kick Syracuse off the schedule, and I'd put Clemson on November 8th at home. That's because then that's that legit top 10 kind of team that you could then play and then nobody's complaining about. So that's what I would do. Yeah. Those are the only 2 little changes. I overall, I like the schedule this year, Trev. The way it's played, when they play. I like having the 2 good teams early. Kind of got to grow up quick as a team. I like it.
Yeah, I like where it's at too. I wouldn't change a whole lot outside of some of the things that you mentioned. Yeah.
Here's a recruiting question. Get to this one here real quick.
From Bobby S., who do you think is the most underrated committed prospect in the 26 class for Notre Dame? I'm going with Pouncey. Most underrated non-commit Notre Dame prospect? I'm going with Dre Quinn.
Well, I think the kid they just got's vastly underrated. I think Jonas Walton is no doubt about it, top 100 recruit, that his highest ranking is like 140. Or no, 104, but then the next is like 140. And part of it's like Jonas Walton is vastly underrated by 247 Sports and On 3, but he's ranked, okay by some of the others. Pouncey's one. I know he's dropped out of the top 25, the Rivals top 25 recently. He's one. I think Dylan Faison's pretty underrated I mean, Pouncey's at 127 and on 3, 140 on 247. I have him as a top 100 guy, but I don't think they're like way off on him. Dylan Faison is a consensus 3-star recruit that some people I don't even think they think he's a Division I recruit. On 3 has Dylan Faison as the number 154 receiver in the country. 247 has him 105 and ESPN has him 119. Like, you don't think he's any good. And I don't think he's a stud, but he's better than that, way better than that. Like, there's nobody that is where they're ranked and where I have them that's a bigger gap than Dylan Faison. I think Dylan Faison is vastly underrated as a football player. And I think they just look at him as like, well, he's a lacrosse player. His brother plays in Notre Dame. I don't think they've even really properly evaluated him. And he's not going to camps and going to 7-on-7s. Why? Because he's playing lacrosse. So I think Dylan Faison is vastly underrated. I think some people have Ben Nichols way too low. Anyone that has Tiki Hole as a 3-star on 3, I'm looking at you right now. You have him way underrated. So there's a lot of guys that I think are underrated by certain outlets, but just consensus across the board, Dylan Faison is way underrated.
Yeah.
Like, he's not even sniffing 4-star. Like, he's 100 receiver spots away from being a 4-star, much less a top 250 guy. So that would be one that I think is vastly underrated. Vastly underrated.
Yeah, for sure.
And the only reason some of you would replace that BC or Pitt is because you want to play Steve Angeli. I don't care about that. So there's no value, in my opinion, playing Syracuse other than the Steve Angeli factor when you talk about replacing the schedule. So I just want to respond to that. But, yeah, and I like having NC State on the schedule. I don't see any value in playing – because if you beat them, you're supposed to beat them. You get no credit for beating them, no matter what they're ranked. Notre Dame got no credit for beating Syracuse in 2018 when they were – really good. No, none. I didn't play anybody. So, yes. Yep. Let's go to last couple here, Trev. I want to just get a couple of them. Some people we haven't asked. Here we go.
Jason Rose. Hey, guys. Joe Rudolph's O-line at Notre Dame will be thought of as a group that put a bunch of dudes in the NFL but never reached their full potential as a unit for bad decisions, etc. What are your thoughts?
This is almost kind of like a Bisa Holt type of question, and I mean, I'd have to hold it because we don't know, but I would sell this, or I would say I don't think that's ultimately what he's going to be known as. And if you'd asked me this question a year ago, I'd say I could see that, but the way that this team run blocked last year as a unit, and the way they dealt with injuries last year, and again, was he perfect? Far from it, but you lost your starting left tackle in camp, who is your most talented player. You lost your starting center, who's the guy you had high hopes for in game 3. You lose your starting guard, who in game 3, who, might have been your second most talented player. He misses a chunk of the season. He was never back to full strength all year. And you still went out and ran for over 100 yards a game. And it wasn't like, yeah, it's just the Notre Dame backs making crazy plays. I mean, to a degree there were, but I could start listing off a lot of touchdown runs where they never got touched. And I think the O-line gets a lot of credit for that. I mean, the 98-yard touchdown run was a great run by Jeremiah Love, and a less explosive back doesn't hit a 98-yarder there, but that play started at the line of scrimmage with just dominant block by Anthony Knapp. And we saw a lot of those last year. So that gave me hope that he will be able to develop pretty good offensive lines as long as he can get them better at pass pro. That's my big concern. But I hope that this doesn't turn out to be true. And honestly, I'm leaning towards it not being true with what we saw. I was very disappointed in the line that Joe Rudolph put together in 2023. Very disappointed. He did not coach well that year. I think he did a much better job this year. Was far from perfect, have issues with this, and this. But, like, guys, you got to sometimes put that stuff aside and say, okay, I don't like that, but that doesn't mean I have to dislike everything he did. Like, they did some good things last year. They really did.
Yep. Some
frustrating things, but I have more hope now that they'll be able to do that.
Agreed.
And this is a good one.
Throwing Hands Irish. Would you rather do a 3-hour podcast with the most annoying Homer Michigan podcast or the most annoying LSU Homer podcast?
God, that's like, I had a buddy in high school, Cam Watley, and he was like wicked smart. Like he went to UVA on an engineering scholarship. So way smart. He would always do like, would you rather do this or would you? And it was always like this horrible thing, like, swim in a pool of loogies or jump in a pool of pee with, cuts on, like razor cut. I'm like, what is wrong with you, dude? Like, you're insane. But like, this seems kind of like that. I'm getting flashbacks to high school with Cam. Those are horrible. Like, why are you trying to punish me, Throwing Hands Irish? Like, what did I do to you to make you want me to have to pick between either one of those two things? It's a horrible experience. I would say the Michigan, though. And the reason I would say Michigan is because a lot of Michigan people are just kind of just not smart. But the LSU guys that I've seen are nuts. And they will insult you. They'll call you names. They'll get loud. They'll get obnoxious. Like Preston wasn't like that when I interviewed him, but like some of these guys, like they're nasty. They're nasty. And so that's probably why I would lean towards Michigan. Plus, at least there's some connection there besides Brian Kelly with Michigan. We could talk about the history and great games and stuff like that. And, probably do something like that. But yeah. How about you, Trev? Which one would you want to go with? If you had to pick one of these two terrible options.
I hear everything that you're saying about the LSU guys. I'm not sitting down with Michigan people, dude. I don't like that team. I can't put it into words. I couldn't put it into writing. And it's everything about it. And yes, like I know reason it's like it's the cheating, it's the scandal. Like I don't like it's everything, man. Big house, it's a big hole in the ground. I don't like your American cheese yellow pants. I don't like the fact that you cheated. I don't like the khaki pants that your coach used to wear. Like it's everything. And we would talk about the great games, but like a lot of the great Notre Dame Michigan games, like Notre Dame lost. And I just, at least with LSU, it's like I could try to talk to them about Joe Burrow, who I like in that 2019 team, because I have an appreciation for that team because it was great. And the last two meetings Notre Dame had with LSU, they won. And so that'd probably be mine, honestly. Like I just couldn't do. Yeah.
I will say this: if Brian Kelly was not the head coach at LSU, my answer would be the same as yours.
That's fair.
But I've actually had to go on LSU shows, and I would not want to do 3 hours of that. At all. Let's get to this last one, Trev, from Andre Tonsel. So many great questions. Real quick, there's a lot of great questions we're not able to get to. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start a thread on the board that's mailbag questions, and I'm going to actually screenshot some of these and answer them on the message board because there's a lot of really good questions here that I want to get to, but Andre's is going to be the last one that we have time for because I don't want to run over the guys' show tonight.
Andre Tonsel, do you think a successful season for this year's quarterback would be 2,800 yards passing with at least 350 yards rushing?
Regular season? Yes. If we're looking at the regular season, that's 233 yards a game. That's about a 40-yard increase over what they were last year. They were like, 198 last year, Trev? Hold on, let me look up last year's stat. I think they won like 198.3, something like that. We're in Notre Dame. Here we go. Hold on.
I think it was 198.2.
198.1. So we were slightly off, both slightly off. But yeah, they were 198.1. That's a 35-yard improvement. That's noticeable over the course of a season. So regular season, and then 300 rushing yards. So you're talking about a quarterback going into this, going into the postseason. Let's see, 2,800 plus. That's 3,150 for the entire season. That's a quarterback averaging 262.5 total yards per game. That's pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty good. And so I'd be very happy with that in the regular season. Now, if you're going to say Notre Dame plays 14, 15, 16 games and they only get to 2,800 yards, the starter gets 20 yards. I'm very disappointed by that because that's what Riley Leonard did last year. But now instead of the 2,800 yards plus, Riley threw for 2,861 yards last year, but he ran for 906. So if the quarterback only threw for 2,800 this year in an entire season and then ran for 550 fewer yards than what Riley ran last year, that's disappointing. That's very disappointing. But, Riley last year in total offense, rushing plus passing, he averaged 235 yards a game. If that's what the number is for the regular season, that guy's averaging about 30 yards more per game than Riley Leonard. That's pretty good. Yeah. I'll take that in the first year. As long as it doesn't include like 13 interceptions and that kind of thing. Yeah, that's certainly a successful first season in the starting lineup in the regular season.
Yep.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Are they capable of more? Sure, but that I'd be happy with that. Very happy with that. Especially with you've got Jeremiah Love and Janarian Price and all those kind of guys at running back. You don't need him to be a 4,000-yard passer in the regular season. So, yeah, I'd be happy. What, Trev, thoughts? I mean,
I'm in the same look. I'm in the same boat as you are. I'm not going to pay too much attention to the overall numbers because it all looks a little bit different. And again, I don't know how many second halves they're going to be playing in this season, especially after like the first 5 games. And so like I won't let that dictate like whether it was successful or not. It's just in the meaningful moments, what is your output looking like? And it can't be passing game is just a non-factor. There's some of the games that I thought Riley would have for sure been over 200. You go back and look at the box score, it's like, oh my gosh, he passed for 100 yards. It's like, oh wow, he passed for 150 yards.
That's what happens when you don't attempt to pass in the second half of the game.
Yeah.
And I had somebody one time tell me like, well, Riley Leonard, he only passed for X number of yards against Purdue. Like trying to use that like as like a, I'm like, my dude, you're being a bit of a clown right now. Yes, he only passed for 112 yards against Purdue. He also rushed for 100 yards against Purdue and only played 2 freaking quarters. That means he was on pace for over 400 yards of offense if he would have played the whole game. Come on, man.
Yeah.
But to your point, we don't know how many games are going to be like that. Now, I think Riley plays a little bit in the third quarter if he's not injured. I think you probably give him a couple series just because he was still kind of new to the offense. But you up, was it 42-0 at halftime? And he's coming off of a knit shoulder. You're getting him out right away.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'd be okay with that.
Me too.
Those are all the questions we're going to get to. One request, Andrew Gilmore, if you're still listening, I put this in the board, but I did not see the Mario Cristobal interview that you were asking about, so I can't respond to that. If you could find that link and put it on the board, I would like to watch that. So there's what I thought about an interview that Greg McElroy did with Mario Cristobal. I didn't get a chance to see it, so I'd like to see it. So if you can put that on the board, I'd love to respond to it. I'm going to take all the questions that we didn't get to. I'm going to start a thread. I'm going to put those questions in there and respond to them at some point in time, either today or tomorrow, because there's a lot of good questions that we can't get to. But we got to run. So the guys are going live at about 5:05. They're going to be going here in about 2 minutes. So you're definitely going to want to go join the fellas. A little quick time to maybe go catch a bathroom break. Great stuff today, Trev. Hey, folks, hit that like button on your way out of here. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Join the boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. You guys are going to love. I did a ranking of the top 2-man running back classes from 05 to now and how the current group stacks up. Going to have a lot of stuff like that over the summer, a lot of breakdowns, working on some film breakdowns right now as well. So you definitely want to make sure you're a part of the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. That's Trev. I'm Brian. We'll be back on Monday, 1 o'clock for RTCF. Thanks for joining us here today, folks, and we'll talk to you again very soon. Have a great weekend, and thank you for being with us on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.